Welcome to the Ellen Fisher Podcast Season 2. I cannot believe we are finally here. Do you think punishment is an effective and optimal teaching tool for a child?
If you look at the term punishment, a sanction or a consequence in response to something out of bounds. If we don't do that in our homes, our children are going to be very shocked when they go out into the world. If something is truly effective, it's not going to cut off my relationship with my child. It's going to both foster closeness of relationship, but it's also going to diffuse the situation.
Unfortunately, the way that discipline has been thought of for most of human history is that idea of punishment, and we're acting in a way that does drive the child away. My definition of discipline comes from disciple, right? It's about guidance.
Today, we delve into the heart of parenting in a beautiful conversation, exploring two diverse parenting philosophies amidst what can be a contentious and emotional topic.
If I enact any form of discipline, my child is going to be traumatized forever. There's really high stakes words used within the gentle parenting community.
There's no question that spanking does not help kids behave better.
Dr. Laura Markham, who's here on my podcast for the second time now, is a clinical psychologist, mother, and advocate for peaceful parenting.
Mothering is teaching the art of living to children. My goal with discipline would be to help a child see why they did that thing. You can say to the child, depending on their age, some version of, so was there some part of you that knew that wasn't a good idea? What kept you from listening to that part of you?
Abbie from M is for Mama is a wife, mother of 10, and Bible-believing Christian with 10 years of experience teaching, who advocates for a biblical approach to raising children.
In Ephesians 6, it says, children, honor your parents and obey your parents, with the idea that this is going to bless you. This is going to serve you well. But then it goes on to say, do not provoke your children to anger, but raise them up in the admonition and discipline of the Lord.
With so much confusion on the best way to raise our children well, these passionate and expert voices help clear them up. What is the optimal way to respond when a child is having a meltdown in the middle of the grocery store?
It's hard when you want something you can't have. We're always dealing with the needs of the entire family, not just of the toddler.
And I think that's such an excellent point to make. That is ignored a lot. So I really appreciate your addressing that. No disrespect whatsoever, but you kind of described a perfect scenario. That's not terribly practical for most moms, calming everybody down because it takes so long. And it's actually punishment, like actual punishment for everyone else involved who is now late, was ready to go. You've catered to this one child so much that you've ended up giving a consequence to everybody else.
Both are authors of parenting books. M is for Mama and Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad are written by Abbie, who encourages parents to embrace the challenge of biblical motherhood and raise your children with love and wisdom.
There's no willy-nilly to this parenting. Who doesn't give a flip doesn't parent well. Where in Hebrews, God disciplines those he loves, and he punishes everyone he accepts as a son, or chastises, or scourges. It's strong language. So it's not all about respect, empathy, and kindness. Some of it is we learn through consequences. I found this to be true in my life.
While Dr. Laura inspires parents with practical information to choose connection and coaching over punishment and control with her books Peaceful Parent Happy Kids and Peaceful Parent Happy Siblings.
Our society's relationship with children is not a very healthy one. That's part of what is wrong with our society. When you say the healing that we need to do, imagine a world where all children learn to express what they needed and wanted without attacking the other person. Those two things alone would make a tremendous difference in how humans related to each other. Peaceful parenting, it's research-based, which means you set limits all day, every day, but it's the way you set limits. I think once they have that aha moment, everything changes, and they're capable of different kind of behavior.
Together, we'll explore the nuances, challenges, and joys of parenting through differing lenses, aiming to find common ground and understanding of one another.
Those are the moms that I'm going to be encouraging. You can't be your best self all the time, but set yourself up for success.
Not only do I agree with what you've said, what I say to people is choose love.
Welcome to the Ellen Fisher Podcast. Thank you guys so much for being here. I have been looking forward to this conversation for a while now. A lot of people might know I've had you on my podcast last season. Beautiful conversation. And I see a lot of, there's so much polarity within the topic of parenting. And I really admire you, Abbie, and just the way you raise your 10 kids. It's so beautiful that I wanted to get you guys together and hear both sides of two different ways to parent. And also I wanted to see what kind of common ground you guys have, because I actually think you probably have more common ground than not. And I think it'll be beautiful for people to hear and figure out what they want to do and how they want to parent.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course. So the first question I wanted to ask is for both of you to answer how closely you relate your parenting philosophy to these terms. I'll start with you, Abbie. How closely do you relate your parenting philosophy to the terms biblical parenting and even authoritarian parenting?
So with authoritarian parenting, I would say I don't relate really at all. So for me, that brings up an image of someone saying jump and a kid saying how high, or saying, you know, I'm the supreme authority, you obey me no matter what. There's not a lot of relationship there. And I don't relate to that at all, either in how I was raised or how I'm raising my own children. Biblical parenting, I do relate to, but not in you could open up a textbook and find a definition with a bunch of paragraphs underneath it. More in the terms of, so in Deuteronomy in the Bible, in the Old Testament, we are called to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. So every bit of us. And then Jesus in the New Testament takes it a step further and says, the greatest commandments are love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. And so there's this vertical relationship with God the Father. There's this horizontal relationship with our neighbors, the closest of whom are the ones that live under the same roof as we do. So this idea of parenting biblically flows out from loving God and then loving the people under my roof first, and then beyond that, of course. So yes, that is going to be informed by the Bible because I believe that that's truth.
Okay, great. And Dr. Laura, how do you relate to the term, how does your parenting philosophy relate to the terms gentle parenting and even the term passive parenting?
I'm not sure I've ever heard passive parenting. I can't quite imagine what it would be. And I can't quite imagine it would be very effective.
I think people use that term when they're talking about somebody else, but maybe nobody goes, I'm a passive parent.
Right. I don't think anybody would probably choose that term because parents are the leaders in their home. How could that relate to passivity, right? So gentle parenting is also not a term I would use for me. I think that when people, it's quite a large umbrella, right? Gentle parenting. I think when people use that for themselves, they're invoking respect for the child. They're invoking that a commitment to not using force against their child. That's what I'm assuming when they say gentle parenting. What I use is peaceful parenting. And I developed that term because of the peace in your heart when you do this kind of parenting. And it's really, it's not the same thing as what many people think of as gentle parenting. It's based on research. I have a PhD in clinical psychology, and peaceful parenting has 3 basic tenets. 1, you have to show up, centered, emotionally generous, if you're going to be the patient, calm parent that we all know children need. That's the first thing. Secondly, it's a relationship. It's not a set of strategies, just like marriage is a relationship, not a set of strategies. And the third is that kids will do their best. We don't have to be coercing them with threats and punishment or bribes. If we can help them with their big emotions, which is what drives behavior, and also set up the environment. Maria Montessori said, don't try to control the child, control the environment so the child can thrive. We all know you give a kid, too much screens, too many sweets, staying up all night, they're going to behave terribly, right? So setting up the environment, helping them with their emotions, that's coaching the child instead of coercion and control. So those are the 3 principles. They're pretty simple. And they do include, it includes plenty of setting limits, right? Gentle parents, I think that the stereotype is that they don't set limits. Peaceful parenting, it's research-based, which means you set limits all day, every day, but it's the way you set limits that makes them more effective. The limits, as well as the child becoming, more able to choose your limits.
Okay, great. I have another question for both of you. What should be the optimal role of the parent, and what are your goals in raising children? So I'll ask you first, and then I'll go to you.
I think our goal in raising children is to nurture that child in all of their uniqueness so that they can thrive and grow up to share their unique gifts with the world. So the purpose of parenting for the child is pretty clear. I think what we often overlook is the purpose of parenting for us, which is that we all have growing edges, and our children will bring out all of every trigger we haven't healed, they will find. And so our goal is also to grow ourselves.
Wonderful. And how about you?
And I agree with a lot of that. I think that those rough edges get shown. I like to say that motherhood is sanctifying, which is, it's rubbing those rough edges smooth or exposing them and giving us opportunities to deal with them. So I love that. Psalm 127:3 says that children are a gift or a blessing from the Lord. So it's this idea that he is handing us something precious. And so one of the major tenets of how I want to view my children is as a steward of eternal souls. Like, what an incredible privilege. And so as I'm parenting them, I want to keep in mind that they're not mine but God's. And that's going to inform a whole lot of the way that I speak to them, the boundaries that I set for them, the way we discipline or not. But keeping in mind that what we want for them is to know that they are loved by God and loved by us first. And then the way that plays out and the nuances in love can vary and can kind of unfold as they grow. But that reminder that I want them to know that I find them precious and that I think it is a great responsibility to steward their lives is what we start with.
Awesome. And what's your definition of a successful adult? You go first.
Okay, so it goes back to that vertical and that horizontal. So that love God, love neighbors, love people. And if I am, in the Old Testament and the New, it's really clear that part of loving God is obeying his commandments. It's hard to have a loving relationship with someone that you're in constant conflict with, like you never agree on anything, you're always running in the other direction. Jesus actually says, if you love me, you will obey my commandments. And so when we love God, love people, when we have children that, and I can't make them do that, but it would be my goal to engender that in them and to model that well for them so that they would be drawn to that and have a genuine relationship with the Lord. But then that would inform what they do with their lives. So they would go forth and live with integrity in whatever job that they choose, that they would be faithful to their families, that they would be honest and kind and generous with other people. And that is true success. And I think the world would view it as success too. We are drawn to people who show up when they say they're going to show up, who tell the truth, who are unselfish, who have a bedrock of integrity beneath them. So that would be the goal.
Yeah. What about you?
I think what you just said is exactly what I would agree with, what I'd be going for. I think parenting is a sacred responsibility, and that raising children to become emotionally healthy adults, emotionally generous adults, is also all about the values that we all want to impart about showing up with integrity in every way. And so I'm with you.
I love that. Okay, so we already have the same exact goals, basically.
Worst debate ever.
Perfect. No, but that's really beautiful, because then it really just comes down to what's the best way to get there.
Yeah.
So you agree with the goal, you
Yeah.
know, and that's perfect. All right, so now let's talk about something. Can you give your take on the phrase, all emotions are valid? You go first.
How do you know you're having an emotion? You feel it in your body, right? It's a neurobiological event. You know, butterflies in your stomach or your heart is racing. It's just how we interpret it. And where do the emotions come from? They come from a thought. You know, if you have a thought that my child is being a brat, you're going to have one emotion. And if you have a thought like, my child is really having a hard time here, oh my goodness, he's hungry, he's tired, you're going to have a different feeling, right? So are all thoughts true? No, of course not. So are all emotions valid? Well, if you mean true, they're real, they're happening. But it doesn't mean that they're based on a true interpretation of the world, right, of what's happening. So we also know, it's well established, that when we acknowledge the emotion, when we, as adults, if we name it for ourselves, if we say, oh, of course I'm feeling this way, anyone would be feeling this way, you know, of course I'm overwhelmed by the situation where I've got 3 children all screaming at once, you know, is that emotion a valid emotion we're having? Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? What matters is we're feeling it right now. The only way past that emotion is through it, to acknowledge it. And as we acknowledge an emotion, we've gotten the message, right? That's a message. Every emotion is a message. We've gotten the message. It begins to dissipate. Emotions don't stay with us. They flood us, and then they leave once we have felt them. So I don't know whether they're valid, but I do know they're real, and that the best way to handle an inconvenient or upsetting emotion is actually to be willing to endure the discomfort of it, and then it goes away.
Okay, what do you think, Abbie?
Very wise. So this is a phrase that I've had said to me so many times because I'm dealing with a framework that I'm not morally neutral. I truly believe there is right and wrong, and then there is sin and righteousness. And I'm going to deal in those terms, and a lot of people don't. So if you're saying, for example, that an emotion has a sinful impetus, for example, and so someone says, oh, no, there's no such thing. All emotions are valid. They're neutral. I agree with everything you're saying. We don't want to gaslight people. We don't want to pat our child on the head and say, you're not really angry. That just increases their levels of angst. Acknowledging, man, I know what that feels like. I'm sorry you're feeling that way. That's just basic human compassion. So, and also that phrase, which I've had said to me, I can't even count how many times. So I think it is really a pop phrase right now this is specifically the gentle parenting conversation that I've engaged with, of kind of don't discount them. And I think there's a difference between saying that something is valid and discounting it. We don't push it out of the way and say it doesn't exist. But like you said, we do not necessarily say, oh, that's true. For sure, that anger is based in fact. Because valid means logical, cogent, having a basis in reasonable truth. And not all emotions have a basis in reasonable truth. So I love to think about it almost as 3 points. So if I'm angry, for example, I got really angry the other day watching a video of a social worker mistreat an autistic child, like righteously angry. Then you come to the realization, I'm angry. I'm not denying that. What do I do with that? We have a choice. And I would say to either sin in our anger or to, as you say, experience it. And I would say, give it to the Lord and move on. The Bible calls it taking every thought captive to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. Like you give it to him. And so we have a choice of what we do with it. Same if my child wakes up in the middle of the night and I would rather be sleeping. It's not necessarily selfish to want to sleep, but I could take my anger out on my child that I don't get to sleep, or I could look at it as an opportunity to reframe it of, it's understandable I feel this way, but I get to serve my child. And for me, as a Christian, that's serving the Lord, because that first vertical relationship is what's informing. Or it could be hormones. Like, yes, it's valid in the sense that I have these chemical reactions that are going crazy, but my reaction is like off the charts, not in sync with what's actually happening to me. Someone getting my drink order wrong, even if my hormones are out of whack, does not warrant my having a rage response or a sinful response. So I'm just really hesitant to immediately say, yes, 100% valid, without kind of peeling back some of the layers of the onion.
You guys, luxury skincare is my jam. If you want my secret to luxurious, hydrated skin from head to toe, you gotta try Osea's new hyaluronic body serum. Crafted by the pioneers of clean beauty, Osea's hyaluronic body serum harnesses the power of marine botanicals to deliver intense hydration and replenishment. It makes my skin feel so soft, supple, and radiant. Made with a potent blend of seaweed extracts and hyaluronic acid, this serum penetrates deeply to lock in moisture, smooth fine lines, and restore your skin's natural vitality. With key ingredients like niacinamide and vegan peptides, this is an ultra hydrating daily body treatment, and I'm now obsessed with it. It's best to layer the hyaluronic body serum under your favorite body moisturizer to maximize results. Your skin will feel so smooth and years younger. It's the body care product that changes everything. Use the code Ellen_10 for 10% off and give your skin a luminous, youthful glow with Osea's hyaluronic body serum.
I not only do I agree with what you've said, what I say to people is choose love. Okay, at this moment, you're enraged. Stop, drop your agenda, just breathe, go back to center. Mm-hmm. And if you can choose love at that moment, you can then choose. And actions that come from fear, never going to work. Actions that come from rage is just a defense against fear, right? Or vulnerability. So yeah, when you said give it to the Lord, that to me is what choosing love is about.
Amazing. Do you have any response to that too?
I definitely view it somewhat differently, but I don't expect someone who isn't a Christian to use the same language. So yes, I see that.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so let's talk about discipline. This seems to be the area that most parents get really hung up on. Parents want to know how to best handle tough situations, and not only the most effective way to guide, but also the best way to guide and raise up a child, because effective doesn't always mean the best, as we know. So can you both please share your philosophy on discipline? And do you think punishment is an effective and optimal teaching tool for a child? Why don't you go first?
I would say that in our current conversation around parenting and the idea of punishment in general, we have vilified the term a little bit. I have an English major. I love words. I write books. And I think the definitions of words matter, especially the primary definitions. So if you look at the term punishment in most major dictionaries, you're going to get some version of a sanction or a consequence in response to something out of bounds. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing. If we don't do that in our homes, our children are going to be very shocked when they go out into the world and experience, by that definition, punishments for doing something illegal or for blowing up in rage against someone if they're not emotionally regulated, things like that. So I would prefer that we destigmatize that term, or at least use it a little more correctly, as I think that there is a role for sure in our homes for giving corrections, for giving consequences when someone's gone out of bounds. Can you read me the first part of it again?
Parents want to know how to best handle tough situations, and not only the most effective way to guide, but also the best way to guide. So let's talk about discipline. Can you share your philosophy on discipline?
So the discipline itself, or the correction of the consequence itself, I don't think is inherently an evil thing or should be vilified. As far as my philosophy is discipline, I think you're going to have a lot more success by calmly conveying expectations and being careful to remind kids of what you have told them kind of are the ground rules. And by case, what I've told them is truth, God's truth. All truth is God's truth. And that's the premise that we're working from. And that being consistent to remind them, and then give them moments to self-correct. And then if they absolutely choose not to, say, okay, we didn't choose right, so we're going to have to pivot, or there is going to be a consequence. But following through on what you say you're going to do, being consistent and intentional with discipline is so important. As opposed to what I usually get, which, like you said, parents are like so hung up on it, they're like, please give me a formula. But what they want is a formula for their 36-and-a-half-month-old on Tuesday between 2 and 4 when he woke up from his nap early. And I think any reasonable human would know that I can't hand them a recipe for that that's going to serve them, even if it does serve them well, because I don't know their child's personality. I haven't invested in that particular kid's life. Even if it happens to quote unquote work in that scenario, it's not going to work on the next kid, and it's not going to work at 5 o'clock. So those consistencies of the discipline of follow through and communication and being who you say you are. Also, I think we need to define the word effective. There's a lot of eye rolling and kind of, you only do that because it works and it makes it easy for you as a parent. If something is truly effective, it's not going to cut off my relationship with my child. It's going to both foster closeness of relationship, but it's also going to diffuse the situation, because I don't think that we need to roll our eyes too much about giving parents a break from the conflict and the stress that they're in either.
What's your thoughts?
So I love the idea that as we're guiding our child, that's an opportunity to strengthen our relationship with our child. That guidance should not be something that is going to create distance between us and push our child away. Unfortunately, the way that discipline has been thought of for probably most of human history is that idea of punishment, and that's why it's gotten a bad name. Is that we're acting in a way that does drive the child away, usually. So that's why it's gotten a bad name. But I would say that my definition of discipline comes from disciple. It comes from to guide, right? It's about guidance. And that we do, as I said, we need to guide our children all day, every day. We're the leaders. Our 3-year-old and our 13-year-old are not ready to make their own decisions. And they're not perfect yet. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to torment their siblings or throw something across the room or whatever. And I think most adults would say that they make mistakes too, even on a semi-regular basis. I think we as adults make mistakes, and we do things that hurt other people unintentionally, hopefully, but sometimes even in our woundedness, we may do that. And so I think our goal with this, you said, what's the philosophy of discipline? My goal with discipline would be to help a child see why they did that thing. And that there were, you can say to the child, depending on their age, some version of, So was there some part of you that knew that wasn't a good idea? What kept you from listening to that part of you? How'd that work out for you, right? Some version of that you're repeating over and over with different age kids their whole lives, right? And I think when children get that kind of guidance from us, where they're realizing, yeah, I actually kept doing that thing mommy asked me to stop doing to my brother or to her or to whatever, because I just wanted someone to pay some attention to me. Or, yeah, of course I was mad. The baby's always on mom's lap or whatever. Now, a 3-year-old's going to need some help to be able to articulate that. But even a 3-year-old can put that into words with some help from us. And I think once they have that aha moment, everything changes for that child. And they're capable of different kind of behavior. If guidance is to change behavior, it's about teaching. And we all know that learning happens when our nervous system is in a state where it's primed to learn, which is vagal ventral. It's not when we're in fight or flight or freeze, right? So when we're in a state of emergency, we can't learn. So if the kid didn't know and we're trying to teach them, that's one thing. Most of the time when we think about discipline, it's not about teaching. It's about, you did this thing I didn't want you to do. You knew better. I asked you 10 times not to do it, and you did this thing. What are we going to do to stop it from happening again? Most of the time, it's hard for us as parents not to get pretty irate about that. And so we have to, I think, start by getting clear in ourselves that we're not just going to overreact to the child in our anger, but instead we're going to help the child understand why they chose to do this and how to make it better now. Wouldn't it be an amazing thing if our children automatically went to repair? No one goes to repair when they're furious. If you're furious at your partner, your husband, you're not going to start a repair right then. But once you calm down and you make that repair, that's how you strengthen the relationship. And so we want to teach our children, your brother was pretty upset when you said that to him. I wonder what you could do to make it better. And that's the expectation. But we don't do it until the child has offloaded to us all of his upset at his brother and everything that's gone on, and we've helped him process it. We've done that emotion coaching. And then, as I say, those emotions are no longer controlling him, and he's able to choose love again. He's able to align with God, as you might say. You probably wouldn't use the word align, but to respond from a higher place and to actually, because he does love his brother. He does want to make that repair. So that to me is discipline.
Do you have any questions for her about that?
So in that case, there would never be an instance where there is a consequence. Is that what you're saying?
I think there are consequences for all of us every day for everything. So a consequence is when I turn on the light, there's light, right? Like turn on the switch, there's light. So a consequence, if the consequence is the parent saying, okay, you teased your brother, this isn't okay, I asked you 3 times to stop, your brother asked you to stop, you didn't stop teasing your brother, you need to, you lose your privilege, your screen time or whatever. We know from the research what happens to that kid from that consequence. We know that they go off to the naughty step or whatever their consequence is, and they're like, my brother, I'm just wait till I get him alone. They're not thinking, how can I be a better brother, right? So if instead we do what I just described, where we sit down with him, we put our arm around him, we say, hey, you're having a really hard time. You knew you were really bothering your brother while he did his homework, and he asked you to stop. And something kept you from stopping. And you do this exchange with him where you're affirming, I love you just the way you are, and I know you love your brother and you're a good person and you want to cooperate with me. And your relationship, we know as parents, our relationship with a child has to be strong enough to support that expectation, right? My take on this is we set high expectations for our kids, and then we give them the support to meet the expectations. Instead of saying, you don't meet my expectation, I'm coming down with a sledge, even a small sledgehammer, it doesn't help them meet the expectation. The research is very clear that when it's a parent-controlled consequence, children relate to that as punishment, and it does erode the relationship compared to the kind of parenting I'm describing, where there's actual helping the child with their emotions, helping the child redeem. I'm a big believer in redemption. We all make mistakes. Helping the child redeem themselves so they can actually make a repair. So is there no place for consequence? I think there's plenty of consequence. The kid calls you and says, I forgot my lunch. Can you bring it to me at school? It's like, oh, I'm sorry, honey, that doesn't work for me today. I can't do that for you. The consequence is they'll be hungry and they'll remember their lunch tomorrow. But I think that's different than a punishment, right? The consequence of them not being able to get their homework done because they're on the screens is we don't do screens on weekdays. You can have a screen sometimes on weekends. We'll set a rule around that, but no screens on weekdays because homework. Is that a punishment? No, but is it a consequence of them not being able to handle that? You weren't ready to handle the responsibility of being in the sandbox and not throwing sand. I asked you to stop throwing the sand. It's dangerous to throw the sand. You got out of I got you out of the sandbox. You weren't ready to handle that. We'll try again tomorrow. There was a consequence. They were taken out, but it's not delivered as a punishment. It's more like we're going to set up the environment so that you can handle it. And also you're going to make a repair to the kid who just threw sand in their face when you're ready, when you've calmed down and you're able to become more, get back to your emotionally generous self.
Okay, what do you think about that?
So there are definitely aspects of it that I agree with, in the sense that those high expectations that we have, that we're not down here going, okay, this child is incapable of functioning. He's incapable of doing well. He's incapable of loving his brother. And so we're just going to assume that he's going to fail. Obviously, you're going to have this child nosediving down into that. And so the expectation of their ability to rise to things with support, with love, with coaching, with discipleship, 100% agree. That is a huge part of our job as parents. There is going to be a layer as a Christian who believes God's word that I would introduce to that, which I know is very diametrically opposed to how you view human nature. And that is that we have sinful tendencies. And so I do believe that there are times that even with all of the support and all of the opportunities to do better, there is a sin in our hearts that causes us to say, you know what? I don't love my brother right now. Jesus in Matthew says that you've heard that it was said, don't commit adultery. But I tell you, when you've looked at someone lustfully, you've committed adultery with her in your heart. Like, it starts in your heart. And a lot of the impulses of our heart are not kind. And some of that can come from a place of woundedness. But the layer that I would put on there is that sometimes that comes from a place of who we actually are. And we do need the redemption part. I completely agree with. And we offer our kids opportunities for redemption and confession and repentance and going back and restoring that relationship so often. But part of that is as a reflection of the redemption that we've been given as Christians through Jesus Christ and his substitutionary atonement for our sins on the cross. And that is a bedrock principle of the Christian faith. And so one thing that we're conveying to our children is that sometimes those urges that you have aren't just because your brother did that to you, or you didn't have enough sleep, or you've been wounded, but sometimes those come from a place of being broken and needing a savior. And in the gospel, the good news is not that we've sinned. The good news is that we've already been redeemed. And so I don't want to withhold that good news from my children by always saying it must be because of this, because as a mom of 10 kids, I've definitely experienced times where, man, you give them so much opportunity and you do the support and you give the patience and you give them the time, and their heart is still very much so bent on, no, I want to do what I want to do, or I don't feel forgiving, or, and some of what we practice in our home is, yes, you get that emotion through you as much as possible. But also that sometimes actions can lead emotions. Sometimes even when we don't feel like forgiving our brother, we give the hug and we say the words, and we find that in choosing the right, our emotions begin to align with our right actions. I don't see, again, punishment quite in the way that you do. And we definitely do enact, this was set up as this scenario that we are not going to do this. And if this happens, then this will be the consequence. And I think one of the things that maintains my relationship with my children, whom I'm very close with and love and spend so much good time with every day as we homeschool, and is that I'm consistent to be who I said I was going to be, and that they aren't resentful because there's this like, I chose that. I knew that was coming, and she said that I was going to lose this privilege, or that this event was not going to be for me if I didn't finish my homework in time, or if I, or even like, Something my older boys who help out with, which I love this, something my older boys who help out with dishes and wiping down counters and tables, or sweeping floors. They wipe down tables too. In the morning and evening, they're in charge of swapping. Now they're 18 and 16, so they're perfectly capable of doing that, but they've been doing this particular job for years because we found that a lot of repetition and just really settling into a job really helps our kids to own it and do it really well before we switch. And so if one of them doesn't do it the night before, then he has to do both jobs the next day. And I'm not even the one that gave that consequence. They worked it out between them. But I think it was as a result of seeing the example that we'd set, that like, because that's not necessarily a logical consequence. It doesn't necessarily stand to reason that you have to do your job from the night before and both jobs from the next day, like if there's been added to the night before, because you could say, no, I'm just going to do last night's job and then I'll do this morning's job. But they actually said, you weren't considerate of me when you did that. And as a consequence, I think that person should have to do all three jobs, last night's, this morning's, and they're like, that's fair. That makes sense. I didn't do my part, and they created kind of their own system. And I can really respect that.
I love that they created their own system, and I would call it a repair. I would say that one of them says, look, you didn't do your job last night. It makes it harder on me now. I feel like you're taking advantage of me. And the other one's like, okay, how can we make this right? So there's a repair there. I think if we get curious about what caused something to happen, we do a better job of addressing what it was. So, you said it's a different view of human nature. I think all babies are born with the capacity to be their highest selves. And yet, I think there will, because of human nature, because we're born to survive, because our neurobiology is set up that we're going to make sure number one survives here. That's how we're all born. I agree with you completely that we're all our entire lives choosing. When I say choose love, I'm serious about this. I think every act, every thought we have our entire lives takes us one place. Are you choosing love or are you choosing fear? It really comes down to that. And choosing fear says, I got to make sure I get number one taken care of here. And so, it's of course, children are like, yeah, I want all the cookies. I'm not going to give cookies to I may love my siblings, but I need all the cookies, right? And so all of us as humans are in that boat. I don't see it as sin. I don't see it as evil. I just see it as, it's the way the human is designed. And every time we choose something else, we're changing. I actually think of it as a spiritual evolution.
So when you say it's the way that a human is designed mm-hmm. by whom?
I do believe that humans are designed by a higher power. I believe in evolution, but I believe there's a spiritual evolution going on. And that when we choose, I wouldn't presume to know what's correct. I talk to people of many faiths and many books, and I wouldn't make a presumption that I know what's right for them. But I've never seen an instance in human dynamics where choosing love wasn't the right thing to do. And I have seen many instances in human dynamics where when people thought that they were so right about what was right, that it led to something that I would be pretty close to what I would be calling evil.
Have you ever tried breath work? Oh my gosh, you guys, I got hooked on it a couple years ago because it is such a simple, helpful way to shift my state and improve my mood. I love the Open app. The Open method is simple and it works. It combines breath work, meditation, and fitness, and they have an amazing community of people doing it together, all committed to personal growth. It's a daily practice, and the beauty is you can fit it anywhere, anytime. Do you know that your breath is one of the most powerful tools for reducing stress and enhancing well-being? With Open App's Breathwork feature, you can access a variety of guided exercises designed to help you find calm and clarity at any moment. Whether you're feeling overwhelmed, anxious, or simply in need of a moment of peace, Open App's Breathwork sessions are here to support you. If you want to get on my daily routine, you can get 30 days free of Open by visiting withopen.com/Ellen. Again, that's 30 days free by visiting withopen.com/Ellen. And Abbie, do you have any concern with the way she depicts scenarios where, for instance, like when a child isn't listening and then you have that connection before correction and helped to have them have a repair where you can encourage them to choose to make that repair? Is that not good enough? Does there need to be a consequence? Like, okay, we've talked about this many times, and maybe this has been many different times throughout weeks and weeks that they're doing something over and over again. Okay, now we need to have a consequence. You lose your screen time for a week. Is that something that you feel is essential, or do you think what she's saying could be something you align with?
So one thing that I've heard both of you say several times is, I've told you this many times and you haven't listened. And there's kind of been this repetitive thing. And something that I've been trying to emphasize is consistency. And so one thing that I've found that children really appreciate is knowing what to expect. You give them lots of feedback early about, you don't necessarily say at 2:05 p.m. we're doing this. That means nothing to small children. But you do set up the scenario in such a way and using language that's developmentally appropriate that they can understand so that they know what to expect. I mean, how many times have we been in the car and they're like, how many more errands? You said this, and you got to be careful, to be consistent with, you do what you're going to say, or you say what you're going to do. And either way. So I would be less likely to be disciplining or giving a consequence from a place of having let it go or seen them disobey a bunch of times, because I'm more likely to be frustrated and upset at that point. I'm more likely to be emotionally dysregulated because I feel very disrespected by that point. So I'm much more likely to have been like, hey, we talked about this. Now, is there room for grace? Yes. And within the Christian ethos, it is the biggest part of the good news. We are not saved by works, like by being good and trying hard. We are saved by grace through faith alone in Jesus Christ. And so that, mirroring that to my children, of noticing those moments where they're especially tired or they are just really struggling. And you're like, bud, you know that this is the boundary and you've crossed it. Right now, I think you just need to take a nap. Honestly, they would view that as a consequence probably because they want to stay up and play, But I'm the parent. I'm the expert. I've studied my children's personalities, their likes and their dislikes. And so I can know that even though he's going to take that as a punishment, that's what he really needs. Or I can also make the judgment call that actually we're not going to the park because you made these choices. And remember, we said we wouldn't go to the park instead of, you did this over and over and over again. And now I'm saying, you know what? We're just not going to the park, which is a reaction.
To clarify, I meant it more like, let's say you've been dealing with a specific scenario multiple times and you go through that whole connection process each time. Right. Not like I've been telling you that I just saying it across the room. Not like that. I meant more like, it's something that your child's struggling with and you deal with it a lot. And so at some point, like for you feel like there needs to be a consequence. And so I just want to hear you guys go back on that a little bit. So I think that is an opportunity for great discernment, because there are times where not giving them the consequence is going to scream your love for them so much louder than saying, I said I would do it, so I did it. And that's what grace looks like. We deserve it, but we don't get it. And there are going to be times where we know that we're abdicating and what we're conveying to them is we didn't really mean it. And I think that intentionality and that staying very, very in your parenting, and in my case, I would say prayer and seeking wise counsel from my husband would give me a lot of clarity at those moments where it's either, we're sticking with the consequence, or I think you got it. And, here's a chance for redemption. So I don't think it's a cut and dried answer. Okay. Do you have anything to respond to that?
I love that you're saying that there would be prayer and discernment, because I think parents so often feel pushed to the wall, like they have to make a decision right now to address this thing. And, it's not actually an emergency. Even if they just did something reprehensible like hit their sister, it's still, obviously you intervene in that moment. The sister has a right to feel safe, etc. But you've got a longer term problem on your hand as if you're describing this as an ongoing situation that you've tried to address before.
Yeah.
And so at that point, we really do need to get curious about what's going on here and what can be changed. We can't control another person, but we certainly can change how we're relating to that person and how the environment is set up for this person. And so I absolutely think there's a role. Prayer takes different forms for different people, but I think that the importance of our taking responsibility for quiet reflection, as opposed to what, as you gave the example that we all end up feeling pushed to the wall and we're like, all right then. And we know that's not where the good decisions are ever going to come from. So I love that.
Yeah. So would you agree that when it comes to discipline, a lot of times people can hear the word biblical parenting and think, oh, it's this authoritative, come down on, my way or the highway. And then when it comes to a parenting philosophy where it's about connection before correction, might think there's no boundaries, and let the child do, just model the example and we don't have boundaries. But to me, what I'm hearing is that you both agree there are boundaries and that that we follow through with boundaries. It's just a matter of what's going to foster the best connection to help channel them and propel them to want to do the right thing moving forward. And so it's just kind of deciding what exactly is the best approach, right? Would you guys agree with that?
I think that you're understanding your worldview, the way you see the world, the way you see God, or lack thereof, if you don't believe he exists, is going to inform that heavily. And I think that's really kind of necessary, honestly. Nobody lives without a worldview.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Can I add to this? I think another, you're looking for points of agreement and trying to crystallize anything that we need to tease out differences.
Yeah.
The reason I think you and I are in the quadrant, if you look at the quadrant that has been supported by 6 decades of research, one of those quadrants is permissiveness. Permissiveness doesn't work. We know that kids don't develop self-discipline, and they do develop anxiety, right? We know that authoritarian parenting, up on the other 10, lots more expectation of the child, right? But also not a lot of support, that the kids who are raised with authoritarian parenting also don't do very well. And you said you're not an authoritarian parent. Those are the parents who have the expectations, but they don't give the kid the support to meet them. And then, of course, there are the parents who are unable to even show up for their kid. No expectations, no support. We know those kids they're the ones who are at the highest risk of everything that's not what we want for children. So the quadrant that's left is the high expectations, high support quadrant. And that's where we both are. And the research is very clear that that's what kids need to thrive. When they first did this research back in the 60s, they called it authoritative parenting. I don't even use that word because you just used it just now to describe authoritarian. People get very confused about the meaning.
Yeah, exactly.
But what it means, what that quadrant is high expectations, high support. And you and I probably have some differences in the way we would support the child, right? But I think, in fact, what's very close here is the idea that we have these high expectations. We're the leaders in our home. And where the criticism and the misunderstanding actually comes from about gentle parenting is the idea that we don't hold those expectations. So I just want to say that there are many kids who have a harder time meeting age-appropriate expectations. And I see them in my work, and I'm talking about kids who may be neurodivergent, may have some hyperactivity issues, may, not wounded by life, but inconvenienced by their genetics, I would say. There are also kids who are wounded by life who have a hard time meeting our expectations. But I mean kids who need extra support. And so I've talked to many parents who say, I can't hold the same expectation I would from this child that you might hold for another child that age. I totally understand that. Responsiveness to that unique child means we need to take that into account. But it doesn't mean we give up all expectations of that child. As you said, we don't give up on that child.
Right. And so just sitting off screen is my best friend who has a child who is autistic. And I just had her on my podcast to talk about this very thing, how you have to adjust your expectations, how you still have them, but you have to be invested enough to know how to modify those things. And that's true with kids who don't have special needs and that are just different than your other kids. I realize that I kind of have my own little research study going on in my home. It's an unusually high number. We have 2 sets of twins. And so we have all kinds of different dynamics, 7 boys, 3 girls, wide age range, very, very wide range of personalities. We did not produce some sort of like personality clones in our home by any stretch of the imagination. And so I've kind of seen it all because since my youngest 2, I have twin 3-year-olds, our 3, I've gotten through that, the ones that the parents send you a lot of messages about, like, oh my goodness, this is driving me bonkers. How do I deal with this, kind of thing. And so again, my bedrock principles remain the same. Truth is truth, no matter what. Right is right, no matter what. No matter if anybody's doing it or not, we're still going to choose to do it because it's right. The ways, and that there can be consequences, both obviously the logical ones of like, you ran through the kitchen and one of my sons split his toe open. Nobody did that to him, but he should have slowed down, as he hit the cabinet. Kind of, there are logical consequences, and then I think they're the ones that we hold as parents that help them to see those boundaries. But the way they're applied and the nuance that happens, because I love my children so much and I'm so invested in knowing them as individuals, will change to some extent from scenario to scenario, and certainly from child to child.
Yeah. So with the different types of parenting books out there, the ones that focus and use the term gentle parenting, do either of you think that they don't hold boundaries?
I think it really depends. Maybe you see examples that I don't see, but I see it's a big umbrella there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I do think that parents who struggle with a child who's a more unusual child are struggling with the whole idea of what are appropriate boundaries, and they may set fewer boundaries. I also think that we have a pretty punitive culture. So we look at other parents parenting in the shopping mall and they're not doing it the way we would. And many people have, that child needs to be taught a lesson. My parents would have smacked me. I don't think that's a useful boundary, a useful way to be approaching. I think if we support that parent and that child with love, it's going to go a lot further in them being able to get their act together. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I completely agree with that, because as I'm getting DMs asking me for those prescriptive recipes, basically, my response is always, I'm not interested in teaching people to parent Abbie style. I'm not trying to get you to replicate what we do in our home, because I don't know your personality, but I do still believe in absolute right and wrong. So within that framework, how that looks for, people are like, well, okay, but if I don't get up by 7:30 and do Bible reading like your family does, I probably will crash and burn as a Christian parent. No. You want to do devotions in the evening? I do think time spent in God's word is important. I think that that's one of the bedrock principles. But how you choose to do it, who leads it, what time of day you do it, there's so much grace and nuance there. And oftentimes when we are looking at someone else, for example, in a public setting, we can't possibly know what's going on, and it is not helpful to be judging. Would be very helpful to come over and say, hey, can I pick your strawberries for you? Just tell me which ones you want and I'll put them in the basket. Well, that's helpful. That's compassionate. But coming over and saying, I really wish you'd get your kid under control. Nobody needs more of that in their lives.
Totally. So about the giving specific prescriptive advice, I have found it very helpful to have specific things to say when I'm going through a tough moment with my kid, because sometimes, I've been parenting for 12 years now. There's been times when I might read a book and I'm going, oh, that's such good advice, but how do I do that, And so I have found it to be very helpful. But you're right that every kid is different. A really prime example is I saw this parenting reel that gave this description or prescriptive advice on what to do when your kid is having very big emotions. And, they're just very, very big, and it's very overwhelming, right? Sometimes when a child has very big emotions at you and you're trying to help them calm down. And he said the first thing to say is, I love that I'm your person that you can come to with all your big feelings. And then he had this prescription on what to say, but about, I can't hear you when you talk to me this way, that kind of stuff. So I'm like, that's a great idea. So I went to one of my kids when they were having big emotions, and I said that exact thing, and immediately I saw this shift in his face like, oh, and he felt seen and heard, and then it really helped. Yeah. Then I did the same thing with another kid, and she goes, "You're not my person." I'm like, ouch.
Yeah.
She's like, "What do you mean, Mom? I have lots of people in my life I can go to with big feelings." And then that it didn't necessarily help in that instance. So you're right in that it's different for each kid. Every personality is so different. But I do think that the broader kinds of ways that we can respond to common scenarios can be very helpful.
Sure.
Yeah. Anyways, I just thought that was a funny side note. So I do want to go through a few scenarios, if that's okay. Common scenarios where parents go, what do I do? How do I help the situation to be the best parent, my highest self that I can be for my child? If that's okay with you guys. Sure. Okay, the first one, what is the optimal way to respond when a child is having a meltdown in the middle of the grocery store? Going back to what you said. So why don't you go first? What you think?
Well, I think it depends whether you have 10 children or one, right?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
Who's there in the grocery store with you?
Very true.
Is your husband there and he can, help with, whatever.
Oh my gosh.
But in an ideal world, you shut out the, those other people who are judging you or whatever they're doing. That's none of your business. That's information about them, not about you. What you do is you calm yourself. If the kid's screaming in the middle of the grocery aisle because they wanted those cookies, it's not going to hurt for them to scream 30 seconds longer while you just sort of bring yourself. And, parents will say to me sometimes, yeah, I take a deep breath and I just feel more. And the answer is, it's like any other neurobiological regulation. If you do it regularly, you're able to very quickly, you take the breath and you're centered. So at any rate, let's hope you've done some preventive maintenance on yourself so you're ready to. And also, if you did preventive maintenance on your toddler, meaning you did some laughing with them before you put them in that cart, right? And they aren't hungry and they aren't tired. And ideal, I said. It's often not an ideal world. But if you've done that preventive maintenance for your child, they also are not as likely to fall apart. Helps a lot, right? Because by now we're in the breakdown lane. It's like if you didn't fill your car with gas, you're in the breakdown lane. Right now the toddler's in the breakdown lane. Okay, so you take the breath. You go down to your toddler. If you can, pick them up easily. Now, a lot of times if you pick a toddler who's screaming up, they flail and they're smacking at you and it gets worse, right? So you can also just get down next to them and say, you are having such a hard time. And they feel seen. They feel acknowledged. Are the feelings valid? Who cares? We're saying, yes, you're having such a hard time. You're not saying you're right to be throwing a tantrum in the cookie aisle. Right. You're saying you're having a hard time. And then you touch them if you can, because we know that the nervous system will return to regular. Right now he's in a fight or flight state, right? He's in fight mode to get that cookie, or he's in, whatever he's in. So if you touch someone, they shift, the nervous system starts, if it's someone that you trust, who touches you, you start to calm down. Your nervous system actually starts to calm down. So if you can, you can say, this is my hand loving you, and you just put it on their back or on their arm or whatever. I wouldn't go near their legs. So you're just, you'll probably see this. Even if the kid's still crying, there's going to be probably a deep breath. Some of the fight goes out at that moment, and there might be more tears. Might be, but I need that cookie, right? But it's less, there's more acceptance of the situation from the toddler at that moment. They're like at least in communication with you. They just got realigned with you. So at that moment, you gather them to you and you hold them and you say, it's hard when you want something you can't have. Now, you're going to have to tell them they're not going to get the cookie.
Right, exactly.
So they are going to lose it again. So you want to, if possible, bond a little bit more before you lay down that law, which you are going to do. You're going to say, so you wish you could. I know, wouldn't it be great if we could eat cookies all the time? And those are the ones you love. And your toddler's like, yeah. So you've got the point of agreement. And then you say, and no cookies now. Ah! But notice they're not hitting you or kicking now, because they're now rebonded with you. They're reconnecting and they're accepting. When we're disappointed by life, we all have to accept things we don't want to accept. Once we do, we stop fighting them, right? And, he's not getting those cookies. You've bonded with him so that he's able to accept that message from you. You hold him a little longer. People are going around you in the aisle, and some of them are offering to help. And you're like, We just need a minute alone. Thank you. Right? You're just holding your little cocoon. And then you pat him and you say, we're just going to grab the few things we need. We're not, I know you're ready to go. And he's probably going to fall asleep in the car seat on the way home, right?
Yeah.
Now, the problem is if you have 3 other kids at this moment, it's a little harder, as we all know. But that's where the preventive maintenance comes in. If you've done the preventive maintenance with all of the kids, you can take the oldest one there and say, Jenny, I need your help. Can you take, the 4-year-old and just, stay in my view right here, but go down to the end and pick out the soup or whatever. Something, give her a task that she can be helpful and she can, watch the second one for you. And it's not, as you say, I don't know what the ages of your children are. If they're far enough apart in age, you can usually manage it because they're usually not all there with you at once. The more kids you have to manage at a given time, you're always dealing with the needs of the entire family, not just of the toddler.
And I think that's such an excellent point to make, and one that I often feel gets skipped over in a lot of gentle parenting social media posts. Because, so for example, I saw a post that just popped up in my feed where a guy was kind of mocking the whole process of calming everybody down because it takes so long. And so the idea is like 45 to 60 minutes later, you've put on your shoes and can finally leave. And that's not practical for anyone. And it's actually punishment, like actual punishment for everyone else involved who is now late, has missed their piano appointment, was ready to go, like they had their stuff together. And you've catered to this one child so much that you've ended up giving a consequence to everybody else, which is really unfair. I think that is ignored a lot. So I really appreciate you're addressing that, because there's kind of this, I have all the time in the world. Just let's like go through the dictionary and find every word on emotion that we can just right here in the aisle. And that's not terribly practical for most moms, nor do most moms have your training to be able to do that, or even my training as 18 years of lots of kids and lots of repetition of those really hard toddler years with those really dysregulated emotions. I love that you point out that the answer is still no, because the easiest thing, and you said, no one calls themselves a passive parent, but the passive parenting thing would be to say,
yes,
cookie, here,
just
cookie,
take
anything,
the cookie.
anything.
Yes.
And that would be an example of something that's effective in that it works in the moment, but it's not effective in that you've established yourself as a trusted source of authority for your child, and that you're going to follow through. You said no cookies, but you didn't really mean it, kind of thing. The other thing that I would like to say is that, and no disrespect whatsoever, but you kind of described a perfect scenario, meaning they actually did calm down to some extent. You can do all of those things, and depending on where your kid is mentally, nap time, all the things, they might not respond quite that well. And so, very practically speaking, without being super prescriptive, you kind of want to get out of there. Like you need to diffuse the scenario. You need to change your environment. You need to give yourself something to work with. Because I do feel like one thing that I feel a lot of compassion for with parents is we're supposed to have all this respect for children. Absolutely we are. There's not a lot of respect for a parent's emotion, meaning like, oh, you just stay emotionally regulated. You just marathon it, mama. You're going to be fine.
Especially when you have a lot of kids.
I've got hundreds of mamas in my DMs that are like, I'm not doing well. I'm failing. Like it's too much. There's not enough resources for me to be able to, because I feel like I've been told if I enact any form of discipline, my child is going to be traumatized forever. My bond will be broken forever. There's really like high stakes words used within the gentle parenting community that you're going to enact some sort of need for deep therapy in the future when you say no cookies. No, absolutely not. No, we said we weren't doing this and we're not. And here's the consequence and we're moving on. Like that kind of, we've diffused the situation and it's nap time now. But instead I was supposed to talk it all through. Sometimes it's just not possible. And I feel like some moms out there might need to hear that. So that the entire emotional conversation can't always happen and won't always be successful.
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about the way emotions work. And it's not really about the conversation, right? It's when you said all the words for emotion, this whole idea that we need to give our kids words for emotions. That happens when everybody's in a good mood and you're just chatting. Many times you're with your kids and you're talking. When the child's having a meltdown is not a time they can learn. They need to feel seen. Because otherwise they'll escalate, right? When we're upset about something and no one's listening, we escalate, all humans. So we do need to acknowledge you're having a hard time. You wish you could have this. Notice you wish is not even an emotion. It's just, I see what you want. You want the cookie. Yeah, we're not going to have the cookie. I know you wish you could. And now we're going to, as I said, we're just going to get a few things and leave. And it might well be they're still screaming at the top of their lungs and we're going to leave. And you abandon your cart. And that's what you do. Yeah. And that's what you need to do.
And that is not a fail. The other thing that I love that you
That's
mentioned is the preparation ahead of time. Now, I want parents, again, to hear that you can prepare out the wazoo and you will still have meltdowns sometimes. So you need to have some grace for yourself, because that's another thing that I see often within the gentle parenting community is that there's this implication because you were emotionally dysregulated, your child was emotionally dysregulated, it's your fault, which is an interesting thing because there's a lot of blowback against biblical parenting for being too prescriptive or very guilt and shame-based. And yet within gentle parenting, it's like, you're the reason that your 3-year-old failed. And you're like, no, I packed the snacks. I had the drinks. We sang the songs. We laughed. We did all the things. He still fell apart and he'd had a good nap that morning. So then did I fail? No. And I'm going to say human nature is still going to be human nature. I'm even going to say sin nature is going to still be sin nature, that we have that I just want it and I don't care about anybody else right now. So, and that's going to be my perspective. But I feel like, again, there's a mom out there taking a deep breath, hearing that and saying, okay, so I could try again. Because there's a whole lot of, you know what? Forget grocery stores. Forget taking my children anywhere. And I hear this constantly. I don't know how to go out in public. I personally can't relate to that as someone who has taken my children out in public with me in the droves for my entire motherhood experience, and gone through the hard knocks of learning the right and the wrong way to do it. So for example, the other day I was with my twin 3-year-olds who are little boys, little identical twin boys, precious little blonde curly headed boys. Love them to death, but they're challenging, they and they're fun. It's like just, constant mix of interesting emotions. And so we go to the grocery store and they love this car cart, right? This bright red car cart. And so I'm thinking they're going to be thrilled to get in this. But I'm on a deadline. So let's go fast. One just won't do it. Just is desperate. I'll hold you. Well, I need my hands to go fast. And it does feel like you're failing a little bit when you give down to that, no, you love the cart. I set everything up. So we compromised and he sat on the bar with my arms around him and he could hold me around my neck. And I sort of had my hands free. Yeah. And that wasn't that I lost the power struggle. But at the same time, he didn't just get held on my hip and take all of my ability to grocery shop. So, being able to see.
I love the win-win solution, right? So often we find ourselves in a challenge where people's needs are not meeting, right? And if we can see that as an opportunity with our kids to say, okay, you want this and I want this. What can we do that works for everybody, right? Kids are amazing at their ability to come up with win-win solutions.
Yeah. And I guess my caveat to that would be there are times as the authority that I know there is no compromise.
No, there's no win-win solution on the cookies. They're staying on the shelf.
Exactly. And there are a lot of those. And there are so many ways that we can work with our kids, but that there be a collaborative solution to every single problem is not possible.
I don't recommend that, as I feel very strongly that they're not ready to make all their own decisions and we're the leaders. I think there are times when they will come up with a good solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to be open to that and not threatened and think because we're their authority, we can't accept anything that originated with our children.
Yeah. I also wanted to just speak to the mom who's listening to this, who's saying, yeah, but both of these women are describing the mom at her best. And I'm not always at my best. Sometimes I'm sleep deprived. I was up all night with the baby and then my 3-year-old is a horror and what am I supposed to do? And I think, the grace we give ourselves, it's you might be familiar with the research in self-compassion. There's a great deal of it lately because it's become quite a phenomenon that people are really interested in it. But actually, the research on self-compassion is that when we can offer ourselves compassion, then we can pick ourselves up and try again. Then we're more likely to make a better choice next time. When we berate ourselves, it doesn't actually work.
Yeah.
Right?
And from scripture, it says that the Lord's mercies are new every morning. Like there's this idea of that you get, I think of Anne Shirley. She says, and her teacher, Miss Stacy, says to her, tomorrow there is a new day with no mistakes in her. She says that, and the teacher says, no mistakes in it yet. Because we don't want to have this kind of idealistic approach to tomorrow that I'm going to get it perfectly right tomorrow, because inevitably at the end of the day, you're going to be berating yourself for something.
But unnecessary.
Right.
I mean, it's never helpful.
Well, and again, my caveat to that would be, I think there are times when we really have done wrong. But the new mercies are, we get to say, I've done wrong. I sinned against you. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. And then start over.
Yeah, which I think of as different than berating.
Yes, it's very true.
Guilt
that
is actually very useful.
Yes.
If you use it to make a repair and make a different
100%.
choice.
Yep, it is
Shame
different.
is more like, well, the way I define shame and the way the researchers define it is more like, you aren't good enough. There's no way to be good enough, right? So,
And I actually agree that we aren't good enough as humans, that only God imparts righteousness to us, but that he has already done so as Christians. Like we don't have to drum up our own good enoughness.
So I think maybe the meaning point is we are all worthy of love. Our own love, the love of God, the love of each other, right? We're all worthy of being, we want to assume the best intentions from everyone.
Well, as a Christian, I call my kids and other people image bearers. They are made in the image of God. They may not all be God's children, depending on whether they love and follow God and declare Jesus Christ as Lord, but they are made in his image and they have inherent value.
Did you know that your scalp ages 6 times faster than your face? It's true. And just like your skin, your scalp deserves the same care and attention. That's where Act and Acre comes in. Act and Acre isn't just another hair care brand. It's scalp care redefined. Founded by certified trichologist Helen Reavy, Act and Acre prioritizes holistic scalp health like no other brand on the market. Their line of scalp products treats common concerns like hair thinning, dandruff, flakes, and oily scalp. But what sets Act and Acre apart is their commitment to sustainability and efficacy, and I could personally attest to the transformative power of Act and Acre's products. Whether it's the stem cell serum for thick, full hair or the scalp detox for post-workout refreshment, my scalp has never felt healthier. So if you're ready to give your scalp the love it deserves, head to actandacre.com and take their quiz to find the perfect hair and scalp system for you. And don't forget to use the code ELLEN20 for 20% off your purchase. Act and Acre, where scalp care meets sustainability and healthy hair begins at the root. Okay, I have another scenario for you. I think I'll probably just do 1 or 2 more, if that's okay. When a child's being intentionally rude to their sibling, trying to annoy them, when you've talked to them many times about it, the sibling says stop and the other keeps going. How do you respond?
That is going to be a moment, because we actually just had this scenario in our house the other day, and there were 3 people involved, and one is one of the most generous people that I've ever met in my life. They are just kind and hardworking and others-centered to the max. It's so sweet. But part of that is being a very sensitive person, and so they get defensive very easily. So this is not someone who was intentionally picking on someone, but they were having a hard time accepting that they were the only one in the room that was freaking out. It was kind of like, she caused me to, she picked on me. She hadn't been picked on. I heard what happened. So in that moment, discipline isn't terribly helpful, because it's not a, I told you that this would happen, and I'm being consistent by following through. Instead, it's a principle moment. It's a because I do agree that discipline is both the consequence and absolutely the discipling process. And so I was able to stand there between the 3 of them and kind of parse out what was actually happening, and help her work through why she felt so threatened, but also say, they haven't wronged you. I did hear, and you have wronged them, and there needs to be some restitution that happens. So I have definitely heard from different accounts. Doesn't matter what parenting style is. I've heard different parenting styles say, I don't require apologies from my children if they don't feel it. I'm not requiring an apology from a child who's screaming. I mean, how bizarre would that be, right? So like you say, once you've gotten them to calm down, once they're back to reason, it's still going to be that principle of your emotions may need to follow your actions because your actions need to align with truth. And the truth is you've wronged this person and that you need to ask for forgiveness.
And what if because they don't want to, what if they won't say sorry? What do you do?
Well, in that case, there would be a consequence in my house. There would be something that they would probably lose as a privilege. I have never had a kid refuse to apologize to their sibling, actually. So I don't have a ready consequence for you, because by that point, we have set the foundation of we love because God first loves us, and that vertical relationship and then the horizontal relationship that outflows from it. And so by that point,
By that point, they want to probably.
Yeah.
Even if they're still upset, they're like, you're right, I should say sorry.
But I do know that there's someone listening that's like, I definitely have been in that scenario. I think it takes a lot of groundwork to get to the point where you can honestly say that very rarely happens.
I agree.
It's a
I agree.
lot of consistency.
It's the modeling and how you live as a family. I agree.
Yeah, and the requiring of the practice. It's kind of like with something even smaller, like please and thank you. I've often heard from some gentle parenting sources that they don't require that because they don't think it's not genuine. The actual gratitude isn't there. And it's not, I don't think it's fake it till you make it, to model and practice with your children over and over again until they do understand what thank you. And they're going, thank you, Mommy, these cookies are so good. And they really do mean it. And maybe that would pop out, but it's more well established. I mean, even by silly things, like my toddlers like Bluey, the show Bluey. And I noticed that Toby was saying, yes, please, which we say please and thank you and may I please, and we correct a lot of the language, but yes, please is not a specific phrase that we've used. And I realized he'd learned it from Bluey. And I was like, that's some positive reinforcement. I'll take that.
And what about you, Laura? What are your thoughts to that?
Well,
How would you respond?
The please and thank you thing, I'm with you completely, and I think it's just a matter of habits.
Yeah.
Right? There's a famous quote that mothering is teaching the art of living to children. And
that is a really good
beautiful?
quote. That's fantastic.
Part of the art of living is how do humans live together well? And so you can talk, are please and thank you authentic? Well, as I said to my daughter when she didn't want to write thank you notes after her birthday party with her presents, do you want presents again next year?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Is it authentic or not? It's you got the
Does
presents.
Does it matter?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Exactly. My daughter also famously said to me, if you make me apologize now, I'll be lying. You always tell me not to lie. And, I do think it's true that when they're in the throes of their anger and they're upset, they can't make a repair. But I think she absolutely would make the repair later when she calmed down. And she still liked to choose, I'm not going to say sorry, but I'm going to write him a letter. Great, whatever, And you're always coaching your original scenario of the, what do you do? You're always coaching the child who is, there's a perpetrator and a victim in your scenario, right? And it could easily be role reversed tomorrow, but so we're not just jumping in to enforce our family rules, although we may well need to do that. The first thing I would always do is I would say to the kid who's just been teased or who's being badgered or whatever, looks like you don't like that. You can tell your sister, right? And at that point, you're coaching them to stand up for themselves, right? And if they try and the other child doesn't acquiesce, it doesn't say, sorry, all right, I'll leave you alone or whatever it is, you can say, our family rule is, and of course they know what the family rule is. By now, the kid who's in this scenario, quote, for this moment, the victim has probably said, Mom, he's doing this to me, right? Or whatever. So I do think when you said you have to do the groundwork is about the rules and the expectations. And of course, there will be a repair, of course, once you calm down. But when you also said there's somebody out there who has not been able to get their child to do that repair, in that case, I would get very curious about what that child is carrying. What are they holding? Because I've worked with many thousands of families, and inevitably, that child who won't make that repair, where it's a repeated thing, it's a resentment against their sibling that has come from something. And I don't think that child is bad and wrong or evil. I think that child has concluded some things that don't serve them and are probably not true, like that the parents prefer the other child just because the other child's younger or different than them in some way. And so that child's carrying something that is a conclusion that is driving them to behave badly. And that's what we want to get to the core of, right? We want to stop the behavior at the root instead of just, sure, they should apologize and repair, but that's the least of it. We really need to go. And there's some healing that has to happen, and that's a whole concerted effort and a program. The parent would have to really use their discernment to understand what's happening, allow that child to share, yeah, but you always take his side or whatever it is. And there's a healing process that takes a few months, but the parent also has to change how they show up in those conflicts. If they show up and they're like, you should know better, you're the big sister, then that big sister is going to be pretty unwilling to see her brother's side of it, right?
Right.
So I think in the same way that you were describing what it's like to be a moderator who is able to really see both sides, I think we as parents, even though there's a house rule, even though somebody seems to be a victim at the moment, that we hold the line on the house rules and the expectations, we also see, you really feel like I'm being unfair, even if you're not being unfair. It sounds like you think I'm really being unfair. I'm so sorry that it seems that way to you. Tell me more about that. And at some point, the kid's going to get to, well, no, it's not that you're being unfair, but he never gets criticized like I do, or whatever. And maybe this kid is your challenging kid who can't stop moving and touching everything and doesn't have a lot of impulse control. Maybe he's the one that you need to do some extra work with so that he does feel your love.
Cool. I love that. I love both of what you guys said. I think that was beautiful. So the next one, I have one more question, and we'll move on to a few more questions that aren't about scenarios. When a young child is screaming at your feet to have their way about something that you've said no to, while you're trying to cook dinner and you have 3 other things happening at once, like a toddler needs a poopy diaper changed and an older sibling needs help with their homework and there's boiling water on the stove.
So that's going to be similar to the grocery store scenario in that so in that case, you have other people involved. And you can hopefully think quickly on your feet to involve those other people, even if it's the one that needs a poopy diaper changed, as distraction techniques, if nothing else. I have found that, and Dr. Laura, you may not think this is a good idea, and that's okay. But I have found sometimes that when you've got a child that's screaming and they have an audience, that taking away the audience for a very short period of time is very helpful. So I will say, you need to calm down, but you can't do it here because somebody's screaming and somebody's spraying water at you. And I think you're just completely overwhelmed. And depending on what their age is, either they're going to sit on the stairs so I can still see them. If it's a very small child, then I might need to go in a playpen so that they're not then raking books off the shelf where I can't reach them. But it's like, you need to be in a place where you really can't experience a lot of stimuli. And it might be for 3 or 4 minutes. But oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, without that audience to feed kind of the performance that they're giving, it's not nearly as fun to throw the tantrum. That helps. Because I have such a wide range of ages, having someone come in and distract them or pick them up and comfort them helps. But what I hear from is so many moms that aren't to my stage yet, and they feel just absolutely frazzled. And so those are the moms that I'm going to be encouraging. You can't be your best self all the time, but set yourself up for success. Maybe you can't anticipate that he's going to have a tantrum, but maybe baby wear and have the child, and poopy diapers, unless they've got a rash, they're going to be okay for a while. right? They don't have to be changed just because they're stinky. In that moment, that's probably not your type priority unless it's making their bottoms red. So maybe you could baby wear, and then at least you wouldn't have two that are screaming at you. And then you could have set up some blocks ahead of time before you started dinner. No guarantee they're going to stay interested in the blocks, or some kinetic sand or something. Those don't always work, but sometimes I find that moms are like, I make no preparation before I start dinner. I literally just walk in and a bomb explodes, and then I don't know what to do. So that mental preparation and the physical preparation, and then realizing that you as the mom and the expert in your home are able to order the level of emergency. So the poopy diaper, again, unless it's causing a rash, is kind of lower on the totem pole than the child that's losing his ever-loving mind, or the child that's constantly asking questions. Because delayed gratification is not a bad thing. I mean, talk about research. It shows that the prefrontal cortex receives so much more activity when we practice delayed gratification and self-discipline, and that it builds on itself. We see this with athletes. We see this with academics. And so when we're saying you are able to wait and you can see the scenario, you're old enough, use some compassion for mom and go take the trash out instead of asking me 1,500 questions right now. And then I will be able to answer your math question, because then I'll be able to focus and we'll all be better off. And I'm not afraid of my older kids changing a diaper. It's a wonderful life skill. And there are people on the internet that are losing their minds because I said that right now. Oh my goodness. Child abuse.
Lily and my kid are like, can I please change the diaper?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a whole segment of society that doesn't like it when people have a lot of kids, and they assume that there's parentification happening and that you must be like forcing your children to change diapers all the time. And so, but if I can recruit help, and their understanding is, I participate in this house, I'm a member of this household, I have significant contributions, that can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's an assumption people make who don't have a lot of kids, because my experience has been like yours. My older kids actually want to help.
Yes.
They see my toddler melting down and they swoop him up and say, oh, come play with me outside. Or I might say, please, can you go take him to ride his bike?
And that's an example of a home environment where they have obviously been invited in to contribute meaningfully, which is so important to kids.
Yeah. Okay. Why don't you respond?
It's a basic human need. Yeah. I think I love everything you just said. I would develop the preparation even a little bit more and say, preparing you emotionally and preparing the kids emotionally is really helpful. So the blocks, absolutely, something, physical, but also preparing you emotionally is just like, okay, can I get 5 minutes to sit down and have a cup of tea and just enjoy it while the children are playing quietly? For a moment, before I get into the kitchen, because we know the minute we begin to focus on something else, like you get on the phone, all of the kids will start fighting, right?
Yeah.
Because suddenly you're not available to them. You're trying to drain the spaghetti water. They're definitely going to be trying to get under your feet if they want your attention. So to just get a little moment for you, so you can get your resources available.
So there's a verse that comes to mind, which is like a global verse, but it's such an interesting application here. Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer because I've overcome the world. Like, don't despair. Don't be surprised when you quote unquote suffer, because a lot of the really negative memes about parenthood that I see are the result of some unrealistic expectation that things were going to go super well and be like running through fields of poppies with shiny hair and your children clean dressed, and that's not reality.
The reality is poopy diapers.
Right. And children under your feet. And instead of like saying, I have to do this again, say, I get to do this. And I was expecting it because I signed up for this and this is a good thing. I don't love this moment. I have a book called Hard is Not the Same Thing as Bad. The whole point of it, the premise of it, is shifting that mental perspective from this is hard, therefore I should run from it, and it's bad and it's negative, to this is hard, but it is shaping me and there is so much potential for good.
I love that. I think you're completely, I agree completely that when I hear from parents, once their expectation changes, their whole experience of parenting changes.
Yeah.
So, and I think the internet has not been helpful in parents developing realistic expectations.
No.
And then when I said emotionally us, also emotionally the kids, if they get their cup filled before we head into the kitchen to make dinner, it really helps. So after we spend that 5 minutes just with our cup of tea, being as calm as we can, to then, just spend a few minutes connecting with each one. Check in with the 10-year-old who's doing their homework and is going to have the math questions and say, I'm going to be in the kitchen, so it's going to be harder for me to answer your questions. How are you doing with this? You want to start your math now? Check in with the 4-year-old who's playing, with the blocks and, get them giggling a little bit so that, because we know that what happens when children laugh is they offload stress hormones. Then they have more access to their inner resources. So then when something does go wrong, they're a little more able to cope, right? And, we can't really predict that the poopy diaper is going to happen. But as you say, we all think of it. Often parents think of it as this is the emergency. But again, unless there's a diaper rash, it isn't. And in fact, starting with ourselves is probably always the first place to start. In that moment when everything is falling apart, to say, okay, thank you. I got this,
What about older kids? We've talked a lot about younger kids. What are the hard moments with older kids? How do you think is the best way to handle hard moments when they don't listen or they come, let's say you give them a curfew and they come home past their curfew and things like that?
So for us, if you have a child that has gone past their curfew, this hasn't happened too much, and it's only by a reasonable time period, but still we're trying to teach our kids to be people of integrity. If you say you're going to be home at 10:30, you need to be home at 10:30, not 10:47. It's not too bad, but kind of there's this idea within scripture, the little foxes spoil the vines. It's like the little stuff that adds up, that snowballs into the bigger stuff. And you don't want to be global on your kids and say, this means you're going to prison because you come home 17 minutes late. That's not what we're saying. But especially for an older kid like my 18-year-old, but he still lives at home and he still is under our authority even though he's legal adult, because he chooses to put himself that, like, he will literally say, I have this to go to. Is it okay if I go? My answer is always yes, because he's who he is. Unless I'm like, no, we actually have a conflict in our schedule that you forgot about, that kind of thing that you're participating in. My answer is always yes, but I appreciate that he's saying, like, hey, is there anything I can do for you? Do we have a conflict? I'm just checking in. I love that. So in the case of if they're consistently coming home late, there'd probably be an activity that we would skip next for the 16-year-old specifically. It would be like, sorry, you consistently didn't come home, so we're just going to stay here tonight.
I'd want to get curious about why, right? What caused this child to do this? I'm thinking about when my 14-year-old had two friends sleep over at the house, and it was in the summer, second night of sleepovers. Like, there had been sleepovers, I don't even remember the previous night, and I was very resistant to doing this. And she said, well, why, Mom, is it not a good idea to do it? And I said, well, you got to get up at 7 a.m. for summer camp. I know what happens with sleepovers. You stay up late. This is your second night. You all are going to be really tired. What if we agreed that we would all be asleep by 9:30? We'd, turn the lights off by 9. We would help you, we would cook the dinner. We would do the dishes. You don't have to do a thing. And I was like, well, you're meeting all my objections. You're making this work for me, but will you actually go to sleep? Yes. And I said to the other two girls, you two, and they were there for the whole discussion, all three girls. And they were like, yes, yes, yes. So I heard afterwards, not even during, that one of the girls said, after your mom is asleep, let's get up and sneak out to the park to see if any boys are out. Oh boy. Yeah. And okay. And I didn't, of course, know this was happening at the time. And my daughter said to her, we can't do that. Why would we do that?
Yeah.
And she said, don't you think so-and-so's cute? She started a discussion about the boys. And my daughter said, no, but we promised my mom. We have an agreement with my mother. We're going to sleep by 9:30. That's the terms under which we have this,
Sure.
this sleepover. And the other girl's like, just because your mom wants you to do that, you're going to do, this sort of, and Alice said, yeah, just because my mom and I have an agreement. Yeah. Absolutely. I wouldn't do that to my mom. And the way I thought about it later is, she wouldn't burn our house down. This is the same thing. This is our relationship. We had an agreement. So she's not going to break that agreement to do this thing regardless of what her friend says. And I think if we have the relationship with our kids where we have that strength of relationship, where they want to honor their relationship with us, they're not going to be purposely breaking it. I think, my kids grew up in New York City, so subways being what they are, they were always traveling from Brooklyn into Manhattan. The curfew thing, we were just like, okay, well, what time are you aiming for?
Yeah.
And okay, what will you have to do to do that? Okay, and can you build in 15 minutes extra? Because it's going to start to worry us if you're home after 11 or whatever. So, but again, that's getting curious about, okay, so you said this and then that didn't work out that way. What happened? And we also had agreements in place of, if you go to this party and it turns out that there's drinking at the party or you feel uncomfortable or whatever, what are you going to do? And we had like a fail-safe that they text us and, at the time they would call us. But, I think with teenagers, we need to be their rock of Gibraltar, which does mean following through on what we say. It also means like helping them, not just saying don't drink, but helping them see what kind of pressures they might be under and
absolutely.
supporting them so they can,
so
they can meet our expectations and what's stopping you from meeting the expectations. And then the other thing I would say about what I often see with teenagers is rudeness, that parents just assume that teenagers will be rude. That's not my experience.
No, not my experience
When
either,
you have
at
a
all.
relationship with your child that and if they're rude to you, I would be like, excuse me? What just happened here?
Right, yeah.
Are you upset at me? Are you just having a hard time?
Right.
For whatever age that rudeness people say, well, from the time she was 11, whenever it starts, it's like that's not how we talk to each other. So I think that the principles are the same at each age, but our responsiveness to that child's needs will, of course, evolve as the child does.
Okay, cool. So I have a little evolved question. Have you ever been triggered and done something that you later regretted? Of course, we all have done that. How would you hope that those around you would respond? With compassion or with punishment? Can you have both compassion and punishment at the same time? Is putting ourselves in their shoes a good way to decide if a parenting technique is good? I'll have you answer first and then you reply.
There's a lot of questions in there, and I won't try to go into all of them because it would take too much time. But I will say, putting ourselves in their shoes, we're not deciding based on how they feel.
100%.
We're deciding based on our values and our principles and what the rules are in our home that we've agreed to with some real thought. So they may feel terrible about this thing that is our rule. And so putting ourselves in their shoes of feeling terrible isn't going to change our decision. But they are, when we talked about the prefrontal cortex a minute ago and how they develop the self-discipline, what happens is when we humans choose, okay, I want this piece of cake, but there's something I want more. I want, my health. We want a higher value. I want to scream at this person in the grocery store, but there's a higher value about how I would act with dignity and role model for my children and treat other people with assuming, the best intentions, right? So we choose the higher value. This is true for children too, but the higher value they're often choosing is their connection with us, right? So the prefrontal cortex is formed by creating the neural pathways that the prefrontal cortex is overriding the signals from lower down in the limbic system saying, I want this, or I want my way, or I want to be right. And we're overriding that with our choice, our choice for love, for instance, right? So the reason I'm bringing this up is that I think we all assume that sorry, because I have so many
It's a lot of
cases here.
questions.
It was. I was trying to lump it together, but maybe I did too many.
But I guess what I would just say is that the prefrontal cortex forms by the child making the decision. And if we're forcing a child to make a decision, they're not actually exercising the neural pathways, building that neural pathway that we want them to be able to rely on later when they're 14 and their buddy says, come on, let's smoke some weed. We want them to have that neural pathway that says, ooh, be with the buddies and smoke the weed, or my parents' respect and my own self-respect, right? So in order to lay that pathway, we need them to be choosing, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's where I was going with that. But I don't know how to bring it back to all of those, and I could stop and let you take a stab at this.
How about you go ahead?
So I love this analogy that I heard one time, and I can't credit it correctly because I don't know exactly where it came from, but You were asking, have I ever been triggered by something and responded in a poor way? Yes, of course I have. The way the Bible puts it is all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Yeah, we've all done things we regret and need forgiveness for. And so, but I love this picture. You're walking along and you're holding a mug of something. I don't know what. And someone runs into you and you slosh it all over yourself. And you're probably not very excited about that prospect. That person, whoever it was, whether it was your husband or your child or a random stranger on the internet that was unkind to you, that caused you to stumble, did not cause whatever was in the cup to be whatever was in the cup. So when it comes out, they can't determine that. That was already in you. It was already in your cup. So I'm always really careful in a moment where I'm feeling triggered or personally offended or persecuted or whatever word we want to put in there, to instead of thinking, how would I like people to treat me? Because that requires someone else to do something, to focus on myself and say, how would I like to have responded to that better next time? Because Jesus says from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. In other words, what was already in there. And again, as someone who believes that we have sinful tendencies that are in there, that the Lord redeems, but that are in there that we have to work against by His strength, that's going to come out of our mouths often. It's going to come out of our hands and our faces and so taking that responsibility and making it less about like empathy, which is kind of a neutral thing. Empathy is just like, I've either been there or I haven't. That's not really moral or not. Whether you've had the same experience with someone else is not moral or not. Instead, it's those bedrock principles that have to inform your decision. So you're right. You can't just go, how would my daughter feel? Okay, well then I can't be consistent because she's not going to like it. That won't work well. Can punishment, by my definition, being following through on a consequence when someone has done something out of bounds, and compassion exist at the same time? Yes. Within the Christian ethos, you have the best example of that in the punishment of Christ on the cross for our sins, which is the ultimate compassion. But within parenting, I think one of the least compassionate things we can do is watch our children walking down a path of destruction and do nothing to stand in their way. And so it is very compassionate to say, hey, whoa, this is wrong. This is not serving you well. It's sinning against God. It's sinning against your family. And this is ultimately going to lead to trouble, destruction. I don't want that for you. I want life for you, and I want goodness for you. So of course I'm going to put this giant roadblock in your way because you're not choosing it for yourself in this moment. So that's what comes to mind for that.
I couldn't agree more that as parents, we're protecting our children, and I think every parent would agree. And so seeing them on a path to destruction, it's our job to step in, obviously, and even in small choices.
Mm-hmm.
Where I was going with the whole prefrontal cortex formation was when you said putting ourselves in their shoes. I don't think we're making the decision based on that, but I do think the reason that they'll make the choice, the higher choice, is their relationship with us. So I think having that relationship is always going to be what's going to keep them off of the path to destruction, keep them making those right choices and creating the self-discipline, et cetera. And I think, yes, we've all done things that we were sorry about and hope to be met with grace and compassion. And, it's an interesting thing, the word empathy, which I do use all the time. But what I mean about empathy isn't having the same experience as that person. It's more like just understanding where that person is. It doesn't mean we give that person, that child, for instance, what they want. Children don't have to get everything they want. They do need a parent who understands, no matter what.
Cool. So, yeah, it makes me think a little bit, this kind of evolved question about myself and when I'm triggered or having a really hard moment, how I want my husband to respond to me. And I know that children and adults are different, but I always can't help but bring it back to that, at least somewhat. I was kind of raised with that. I didn't really grow up with consequences. I grew up with, I feel like my parents were already doing like a gentler, peaceful parenting approach before that was even a term, is kind of when I look back to it, But I think about like my husband and I, and how if he kind of, maybe had compassion, but also was like, and I'm not going to hang out with you tonight because I don't like how you responded to me, or, and you can't, you make your own dinner tonight type of thing. 'Cause my husband likes to make dinner. That kind of like a punishment type thing, how that would, I feel like that would sever my relationship with him. So that's how, what are your thoughts on that? And how, if that could be at all related to as how we adults would respond if we had friends or relationships in our life give us punishments for our mistakes versus children. What are your thoughts on that?
So one of the things that I feel like as a Christian parent I'm striving to do is
model
what God does for us. And the Bible clearly says the Lord disciplines those he loves and he chastises those whom he calls sons. It's almost a sign of like, you're mine. You're close enough to me that I can set these boundaries for you and give you consequences for them. But there is such a huge difference between that relationship and the relationship of peers with my husband. So I do hear a lot of questions about, would you do this to an adult, about a consequence? And of course, I feel like the logical fallacy there is, and when it says the Lord disciplines those whom he loves, it is again talking about the discipling and the teaching and the bringing along, as well as the setting and enforcing of boundaries. That's a very holistic word. And the chastising is more of a consequence concept. But that false logic that says a child who is in need of authority, in need of a particular kind of connection, in need of a particular boundary, in need of more development, more maturity, all those things, yes, deserves respect, but their opinions and their ways of doing things do not deserve the same level of weight because they haven't lived as long to have all of those kind of responsibilities. And genuinely, I believe God-given authority, that like we're supposed to be the ones kind of bearing that weight for our children. And so would you do this to an adult if you would do it to a child? It falls apart a little bit for me because I've never had an adult at my feet trying to kick me and bite me, right? So I don't think it would be appropriate for your husband, if he normally cooks dinner, to say, I'm punishing you by withholding my cooking.
Yeah, it was just
dinner.
This random thought of
right.
What an example would be.
But I love that you brought that up because I think it's an important distinction to make, that children deserve the same level of consideration and respect, but their opinions cannot yet be given the same level of weight because they're not, because they're always going to go for the cookie.
What do you think about that?
I think it's pretty clear, again, from the research that children's ideas about relationships are formed from the time they're very little. You can take a 13-month-old baby who cannot speak yet, and you can do a protocol with her called the strange situation in a lab, and you can have it with her father, her mother, her grandmother, anybody, and you can see whether she thinks that person will meet her needs, will come through for her or not. That's the attachment protocol. And we know that children learn both sides of every relationship. So if what they're learning from the person who keeps them safe, who teaches them what's red and what's blue, who feeds them, who gives them nurturance, if what they learn is love, they're going to treat themselves and other people with love. Not that they're not going to have moments of choice where they're going to say, do I get mine or do I, be emotionally generous here? But they are going to be bringing love into their other relationships. Children who have not been spanked do not grow up to spank their children generally. It just doesn't happen because it's not something they've learned about the parent-child relationship. And so when we say, what do you think about this? I think we would all say that would be ridiculous for our partner to punish us for something. We would want our partner to offer us understanding, I think it's not so different with a child. Of course the child's not ready to make their own decisions. Of course we're not giving them the cookie or whatever else it is. And of course we've got whatever rules and boundaries we have. And of course when they're on the floor trying to bite us, we're calming them down, as we've previously discussed, getting them out of, all the stimulation happening in the family off to the side. helping them through those big emotions. And then after they've done that, they are clinging to us and sobbing and saying, "Mommy, mommy." I mean, there's a rapprochement where they're connecting with us again, right? And where we've just strengthened our relationship by doing this. And I don't think any kind of punishment, consequence at that moment, or even later, would be appropriate. This kid's having some big feelings that if he's, let's say 3, he wasn't able to handle. It would be the same as, again, to take the husband analogy. I'm with my husband in the kitchen. I get a phone call. Somebody tells me something terrible. I hang up the phone. I can't deal with it. And there's something in front of me on the counter, and I just pick it and I hurl it at the floor, a plate, let's say. And my husband turns to me and says, "What is going on with you? Go to your room and calm down." What I needed him to say was, "What's going on? How can I help?" And that's what the 3-year-old also needed. What's going on? How can I help? So sure, we're not going to give the 3-year-old everything he needs. He needs a different kind of care than I needed from my husband in the kitchen at that moment. But I think we're always saying to each other, at our best, if we can, if we have a bunch of other kids there and the poopy diaper and everything, life is not always perfect. But what we're always wanting to say to each other is, "What's going on? How can I help?"
That's actually a phrase that I use with my kids all of the time. How can I help you? Because it's a whole lot nicer than what, even if I have to work on my tone for how can I help you. So I don't disagree in principle of the fact that we all need that in our moments of absolute, like, chaotic, I've lost it, I don't have the thread anymore. But I do believe that there are scenarios when, as an adult, we maybe aren't hysterical or anything like that, and our husbands would then have a very reasoned conversation with us. I can think of an example when I was struggling with postpartum rage. I didn't even know it was a thing. Like I couldn't self-diagnose. I just knew everybody was annoying me all the time, right? And they were doing it on purpose. I just knew it, And it was about 2 to 3 months after I'd had my 8th baby and had never dealt with it before. And so I remember kind of thinking, like, who is this person and what's going on? But I didn't know what it was. So there was a moment where I came downstairs. I told my children to clean up. And they'd done something, but it wasn't exactly what I'd asked them to do in the same pile. I mean, sometimes you just want to go, "Kids, if you pick up one pile, do that one because it's the most obvious one, like that's going to serve you well." And they hadn't picked up the obvious one. And so instead of simply saying, "Hey, we need to try again, guys," which is often what I say, like, "Come over here and get going. Like, you shouldn't make your best effort." I started lecturing and went on way too long and was much too strident about it. And I was listening to myself and thinking, I don't sound very nice and I'm not being very reasonable. I'm going global with this. And so my husband was able to say, "I know the circumstances aren't ideal. And I know that you're tired." And I mean, to validate all those things, but your circumstances shouldn't be determining the outcome and your response to them. And I can receive that. I don't think that consequences and disciplines in the middle of a meltdown for a 3-year-old or any age are particularly helpful at all. They're not able to receive them. I actually do think that they can be helpful as almost pins in a map of, I kind of, in my laziness, would like to not clean my room, but I would also like to go to the coffee hangout tonight. And I lost my coffee hangout last time. I'm going to do this, because sometimes our motivations aren't pure and we have been trained in discipline and we still just don't want to. And I know that from a mom who trained me really well in discipline. And I was still a very lazy teenager in certain areas. I was very self-motivated and some, very lazy in cleaning my room, And so I definitely have kids that do better with that. Lost coffee house last time, so I'm doing it. It's almost like a thing in their brain that says, okay, I have the choice to make, and I don't want that consequence, kind of thing.
You have anything to say before I move on to the next question?
I just call that structure. It's like we don't do the screen time on the weekdays, or first clean up the room, then you get to do the thing. You don't do the thing, you don't do the cleaning, sure. You don't do the thing. It's that simple. I don't think of it as a consequence or a punishment so much as when, then.
I feel like you guys agree on a lot, actually.
I feel like the one thing is that a lot of kids would view that almost as a consequence. We can't control how our kids view things. And so a lot of the things that I get feedback are unkind or unpleasant to my children, I think, yeah, but a 3-year-old who has a toy hammer raised to bonk it on his brother's head, when you pluck it out of his hands, is going to view that as you're violating his space and his possessions. But it's not true. You were keeping his brother safe, and it was less a punishment and more of your role as a parent, but they're going to see it as a punishment.
I think it's how we show up. Are we, as I did the sandbox example, are we taking them out of the sandbox as, all right, then, you know better. Enough, you lose this privilege. Or are we saying, you weren't able to stop yourself from throwing the sand. It was hard. No more sandbox today.
Right. Can I posit her question?
Yes.
Really quickly? So something that I've seen, because as you say, gentle parenting is a huge umbrella, and I think it's evolving very quickly due to the animal that is social media. Like, it is just exploding, and it is being taken off in all
This is what I was just gonna ask.
of crazy directions in some cases. So for example, there was a forum recently that someone shared with me that a mom was saying, basically, this was within a Christian context, or at least a self-proclaiming Christian context. There wasn't much biblical context behind it, but she was talking about not being able to explain the concept of Easter to her child because he had never been punished. Okay. So, because of substitutionary atonement, the idea that when we have separated ourselves from God with sin, that Christ had to atone for our sin. That's a really basic Christian tenet. And so she was saying, I can't talk about punishment because he's never been punished. And so I was like, okay, what does never been punished mean? Probably not never. She said he had never lost a privilege. He had never been reprimanded. He had never been, he had never been spanked. He had never lost a privilege. He had never been put in time out, and never been reprimanded. Her reasoning was because it is inherently unfair to give a consequence for being 3. So, which on the surface, I agree with, in the sense that if a 3-year-old is simply, quote, doing things that 3-year-olds do, like throwing a toy across the room, then the correction needs to happen, and there might need to be some toys taken away or whatever, but it didn't sound like the toys were even being taken away. I don't know if I'm extrapolating too far, but that seemed extreme. Do you agree?
So I would say that neither of my children were ever spanked, ever had a timeout. I was thinking about, what is the reprimand? I mean, I don't think I ever reprimanded my son. My daughter certainly, snuck some chocolate out of the cupboard, or was reading with a flashlight after she was supposed to be asleep, or I'm trying to think of, the kinds of things that I would have reprimanded. And I certainly said, no can do. You can't keep a flashlight in your room anymore.
Right.
Or I'm not going to keep chocolate in the house for a while. So, was that a punishment to her? No, I was like, she's not able to control herself yet. I'm going to say, she's 5, we'll have chocolate another time. So were my children reprimanded? I don't know. That she certainly would have experienced that as, yeah, my mom took away the flashlight. Was she punished? I don't call that a punishment. I'm like, I didn't realize that leaving the flashlight was going to cause this. I don't like what happened. Structure, take away the flashlight, right? Same thing, take away the chocolate. Did she know that it wasn't okay to do this? Did I say to her, you and I have an agreement about this. Bedtime is bedtime, right? Yes. So I would say that it's not outlandish to me at all that children would never receive a consequence, never have a timeout, because my children never did. And my daughter has occasionally been with me when I've spoken, because she's gone, like when I went to China or whatever. And parents always say, is this true? She never yelled at you? And my daughter says, well, actually, yes. And they say, but then how did you learn to do the right thing? And Alice said, I did the right thing because I wanted to do the right thing. Because I wanted to be the person that my mother saw me as being. And I didn't always do the right thing, but I always tried to make things better if I did, like I would call my brother a name and then he would tell me it hurt his feelings. And then I would, when I wasn't mad anymore, I would apologize to him. I mean, so that kind of, I think it's sort of like when you said, if you do the groundwork, the child will apologize, once they calm down. I think if you do the groundwork, my experience as a mother is doing the groundwork with your children where the relationships are sacred and they want to be that person that you're raising them to be. Sure, they're going to make mistakes, but reprimanding, I don't even know whether I would put that kind of a word on it. And punishment, it's not useful. I'd want to get curious about why they did it. And some things, I know why she ate the chocolate. She was 5 and she wanted chocolate, right? And so then I just changed the structure so she didn't have access to the chocolate until she could manage it.
So I have a question then kind of about what she was saying. What do you think about these parenting accounts that have like maybe 1 or 2 children and they're giving very prescriptive advice on gentle parenting? Do you have any thoughts on that? On like potential harm for that? Or do you think it's good?
I think there are people who feel very strongly about parenting. Most of us, certainly all 3 of us, and, most of the people listening. And so some of those people have discovered something that has made them very excited to share it with the world. They've discovered X about parenting their 3-year-old, and they want to share it. And they only have a 3-year-old, but they're going to, put that information out there. I guess if it works for you, the listener, okay, I'm not going to judge that person. I'm always looking at the research and the science, and I want to see, that's not the only way I make the decision. But it usually bears out the common sense in the end. But we do need to examine the common sense too and look at how that works with the research. So I would say, my bias is, does the science support that? And I don't know if this person with the 1 child has actually looked at the science. That person with the 1 child has a right to listen, she might have been she might be an influencer in terms of other things like decorating her house. I can look or not look, And so if I like the way she's raising her 3-year-old, I guess I can look. I'm not going to judge her.
Yeah.
I guess that's what
okay.
I'm saying.
What do you think about it?
Same in the sense that I have absolutely no control over what she says or does. I guess I would differ a little bit in that there's a huge emphasis in the Bible on wisdom and the idea of having, now, there's a specific book, there's 2 of them, that is written by the Apostle Paul to a young man named Timothy. And he tells them, don't let people despise you because of your youth. Like you're a person, but this is an adult. And so it's not just don't let people despise you because you're a 6-year-old. Obviously don't let people despise you because you're a 6-year-old, but we're not talking about a 6-year-old influencer. We're talking about someone who is a mother and has children. And so, but there is a principle of learning from those who have gone before and kind of having some humility and being a little slower to speak, especially when you're promising certain outcomes or threatening certain outcomes for certain ages that you yourself have not personally experienced. Now, I suppose if you're saying this study shows that this or such is so, then that could back it up. I am not discounting all studies. I think I find them useful often. I do find that sometimes it's possible as human beings, as fallible human beings, to bring our own biases into studies, into what we hope to see, into what we end up seeing. And so while I'm certainly not dismissing anything out of hand, I think I'm just cautious with certain accounts. I'm not going to be getting my information probably from a 22-year-old with 1 child simply because they could have some really good insights, but I'm going to be looking more toward this is a funny thing to say as a person on the internet, in-person people that have gone before me that I can see the fruit of their labor in their own children and see the fruit of their relationship. And praise the Lord, He has given me so many good examples of women who are strong in their Christian faith, who have long-lasting relationships with their children. And I'll be honest, some of them are definitely doing some of the things that the gentle parenting world or even the science says should break their relationships with their children are guaranteed to produce horrible trauma, and it's simply not the case in their relationships. I could give you multiple examples of that. Another thing that I would be maybe a little bit hesitant about is the idea that all of our parents who have gone before us have just done it all wrong. There's not a lot of humility in that. I would prefer an eat the meat and spit out the bones approach to say, because my children that go after me and their children that go after them are going to think they're wiser and have it figured out and be talking about the ways that even though I was striving in God's strength to parent them well, I didn't do it right. They're going to say the same thing about you someday, even in small ways, probably, and their children are going to say the same about them. We always believe ourselves to have been wiser than our ancestors. And so I think that dollop of humility is always helpful.
I think humility is always helpful. I agree. And I hope my children do a better job of parenting than I did. And I think that, parents who've made mistakes, you said they didn't know what they were, we have this attitude, they didn't know what they were doing. So I talk to people who say, but my mom loved me. Of course she loved you, and it's okay that she wasn't a perfect parent. She did the best she could with what she had, just like we've done the best we can with what we have. I don't think judgment is ever such a useful thing.
Well, and I agree with that, but we do, especially on social media, have an entire civilization of trauma-obsessed young parents.
Yeah.
They are they're talking about parenting themselves. They're talking about laying everything. Any of their struggles are all their parents' faults. And I think I have one parent that struggles with mental health issues. I know what that's like, but I am much more concerned with that vertical relationship, how I stand before God, than I am concerned with what that parent did or didn't do right for me in their struggles. And that comes from a place of maturity because that took a long time to get there. So maybe some of these young parents just aren't there yet, but I get a little bit concerned about the comment sections where it's like, I know my mom, messed me up for life and therefore I will never do that, because that's a very resentful and bitter place from which to parent. It's also a concerning place from which to parent when you're almost parenting as activism. So you're saying, I'm not going to do what she did. And there's a pendulum swing often that goes into permissiveness, actual permissiveness, even though they wouldn't identify themselves as permissive. But they're actually not parenting because they believe that their parents were too hands-on, too controlling, too authoritarian. And then they almost feel terrified at the thought of, now you're establishing that we are the authorities and absolutely they don't get to do whatever they want. And they're saying, no, if I did that, I would be limiting their self-actualization. I would be impeding their autonomy and I would be traumatizing them just like I was traumatized. It's a very reactionary response. And I do want to tell them to take a lot of deep breaths.
I think that the place of power is always where we are in the present moment, where we can actually work on us. It's never going to be about controlling somebody else. And so that person who's asking for help on the internet or who's sharing on the internet, I would just say, it doesn't really matter what your parents did, not to invalidate her experience, but more like, I'm so sorry that you had that experience. And now it's time to take the deck of cards, you were dealt a hand of cards, you need to play the heck out of those cards. This is your job now. Yeah. And so I see parents who are so brave every single day in my work, who are turning around generations of trauma. And I believe trauma exists. I believe people have been deeply wounded by their childhoods. And I believe that the only way forward is to heal ourselves, and that will heal our children. I don't think, as you're saying, being reactive and saying, oh, I won't do that to my kids, I'm going to swing in this direction, that's not useful.
Guys, have you tried my favorite clothing brand yet? I know I talk about Indigo Luna all the time, but it's only because their clothes are the first thing I reach for when I'm getting dressed for the day. Look, I've got 5 kids and I have to be comfortable while I'm taking care of them, and I want to look my best and feel my best. These clothes are top level comfort and so incredibly soft. They hug your curves just right and are perfect for both days at home and out and about because they're so beautiful. And my love for this brand goes even deeper because they are committed to using organic, plant-based materials and ethical production practices, which makes supporting them feel good on so many levels. Indigo Luna clothes are technically activewear, but I personally wear them almost every single day, whether I'm working out or not. I love the Agni flares and the Asana shorts so much, but really everything in their shop is beautiful. Enter the code LNLOVE for 10% off Indigo Luna. Okay, I have a question for you, Abbie, directed towards you. Many people assume biblical parenting is harsh and shape it around, like common phrases like spare the rod, spoil the child. Can you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so spare the rod, spoil a child is actually not from the Bible. It's just kind of an idiomatic expression, but it does come from a particular verse. It's in Proverbs 13, and it says, "He who spares the rod hates his son, but he who loves his son will be diligent to discipline." It's probably not an exact quote, but it's the idea that it's my mom would boil it down to the old school phrase of, if I didn't care about you, or if I didn't love you, I wouldn't care about what you did, kind of thing. And so depending on your hermeneutical interpretation, which is just a fancy way of saying the way you interpret the literature, specifically Bible usually, some people say that the rod is physical punishment. Some people, and I think that you could make a hermeneutical argument for that. Some people say that the rod is some other form of corrective force, something that channels a child in a particular direction. Some people say it's more like a shepherd's staff and you're just guiding very gently. I think that the main key here is this idea of intentionality yet again. There's no willy-nilly to this parenting. And there is this almost like urgent charge there to care about what your child does. He who doesn't give a flip doesn't parent well, and won't correct and won't discipline. He who gives a flip will stay in there, even when it means that the kid isn't thrilled about the boundaries, even when the kid isn't thrilled about the consequences. You're more concerned with their ultimate outcome, their soul, than you are concerned with whether they love not getting the cookie or not, for example, as a very minor example. So you could do a whole podcast on the whole rod concept, but really, the idea, okay, so you said it's harsh, or the view is harsh, and I think that it comes from that argument a lot of times. There are some examples of specific directives to parents. So in Ephesians 6, it says, "Children, honor your parents and obey your parents." And with the idea that this is going to bless you. This is going to serve you well in life. These are the authorities and the wisdom placed in your life. I know there are people listening that are like, my parents aren't wise and they were not good authorities. That's true. So it's not a promise, it's a principle. We're dealing with a principle instead of a specific life circumstance that someone has. But then it goes on to say, parents, it speaks to fathers specifically, but I think we could definitely extrapolate it to mothers, to say, do not provoke your children to anger, but raise them up in the admonition and discipline of the Lord. And again, it's a holistic view of discipline. It's both the boundaries and the enforcing of them with consequences, and the discipling and the teaching and the pouring in. It's very much so not harsh. In fact, it requires a lot of you as a parent, because it requires you to be forbearing. It requires gentleness, absolutely. Ephesians 4:2 says to be completely humble and gentle, bearing with one another in love. What an incredibly convicting verse. Completely humble and gentle, like all the time. Nobody's going to achieve that, but it's still the goal.
So can spanking ever be humble and gentle? And can you make an argument for that? You said there could be a case for that. Is there ever a reason to spank, in your opinion?
So I would say that spanking is one of the most contentious topics on the internet. And I don't typically speak to it specifically because there, one, are scary people out there. Two, genuinely. Two, there's going to be two pretty polarized camps. The ones that say that it is abuse of the worst kind, and if any parent ever, including your own or anybody you were to do it, then you are automatically abuser. And obviously, if I were to make a case for it, then completely lose that side. There's also another side that believes that they're being told by God in the Bible to spank. And if I say that I don't spank, then I lose that polarized camp as well.
Is it only from that one verse?
No, there's more.
There's more.
Yeah. There's more, and there's also the historical context of corporal punishment being a very long-standing practice throughout history. It's not an isolated or even specifically isolated to the Bible practice at all. Worldwide, because we're talking, gentle parenting is primarily a Western philosophy in many ways. Not only, but you're going to have a hard time making a connection with someone in the Middle East talking about gentle parenting, or Russia or China, or So we have to kind of acknowledge, I think, the parameters that we're working with. So I will say this, that I was spanked very infrequently as a child growing up. And I do not believe my parents to have been abusive to me in the process. I can't remember the exact specific instances of it. Like I said, they were very rare. And I have a very good relationship with my parents. Interestingly, anytime I see someone say that, no matter how calmly, there's usually, if it's a social media post, again, social media is a different animal. People don't hopefully respond the same way that they would face-to-face with someone. They have that screen and they're able to just shoot off well, that must be because of this. So whereas I see a lot of indulgence for the claims that you were traumatized by your parents, yeah, me too, girl, kind of thing. There's a lot of validation for that. And I can't invalidate that. I don't know their personal experience. So you have to say, yes, like you said, I'm sorry you dealt with that. There is a lot of invalidation for people saying that they were not traumatized by a particular practice. And so it's like, you just don't know you're traumatized yet, or you think you have a good bond, but it makes you think of Elf. You sit on a throne of lies, kind of thing. You don't know yourself well enough. You haven't done enough self-reflection. If you did enough self-reflection, self-parenting, did the work, did the therapy, you would know that you were abused, kind of thing. And I think we need to have enough respect for people's understanding of their lived experience to not invalidate either side.
Okay, what are your thoughts on that?
We have many decades of research on spanking, and there's no question that spanking does not help kids behave better. That's the first thing I'd say. And there's no question that it doesn't help them grow up to be better adults. And we could parse out studies, but there's nothing that challenges those conclusions. Those are pretty clear. I was spanked also growing up some. I think there's pain for a child physically when they get spanked, and what happens to that pain. If you have parents who are somehow able to bring that child back into the fold, as I'm hoping happened with you, then maybe there's some repair there so that you're still able to connect with the parents. I've seen many parents who I have worked with over the years who have pain from their own childhood, from having been hit by the people who had the sacred responsibility of raising them, but then hit them. I've seen parents respond to that in all kinds of different ways. When that pain gets pushed away, when the parent's unable to feel it, the parent is most likely to act in ways toward their child that are not ways that are going to help the child, right? When they've repressed their own pain, they're much less able to guide that child in a loving way. So I think we know that hitting is not the way to teach children. We were talking before about, what my daughter said about how she learned to behave. And I was thinking, I wanted to share that at one point I had a conversation with my kids. And I said, so people are always asking me this. How'd you learn, for instance, like not to hit? And my son said, well, you would never hit us. So why would it be an okay thing to hit? And I said, yes, but I didn't punish you to teach you not to hit. How did you learn not to hit? And she said, well, if you punish someone to teach them not to hit, and they were young at the time, she was 14 and he was 18. So she said, well, if you punish someone to teach them not to hit, then they won't hit because they're afraid of being punished. But what you taught us is how it affects the other person. So what I got to was I didn't want to hit somebody else because I didn't want them to be hit, to experience being hit. And I said, but didn't either of you ever want to hit somebody? And she said, sure, don't you remember that time I socked my friend? You know, she punched her friend. And he said, I remember really wanting to hit her, his sister. But you know, I could always go to you and tell you, and you would always understand and help me solve whatever problem I was having, so I never needed to. And I just think, wouldn't it be great if all of our children had that experience instead of an experience that says, I think you did the wrong thing and made the wrong choice, so I'm going to make you feel physical pain so you don't make it again. It's like, it's completely unnecessary for that to happen to our children. Zero necessity. It's not the best way for them to learn, and it's not the best way for them to become an emotionally healthy adult. So I think every parent knows this when they see the look on their child's face when they hurt them. I think they know this. And I think nobody wants to do it. I think people might feel they should do it to teach a lesson, or they don't know what else to do. They're at their wit's end, but I don't think any parent really wants to.
Do you have any thoughts on that before I move on to the next question?
I think I'm trying to remember the exact phrase that you used, but it was something to the idea of, wouldn't it be nice if every child had the experience where they could always go to the parent and never experienced the pain?
I didn't say never experience the pain. One of my basic precepts about emotion is we have to be willing to be uncomfortable and experience the pain. If we don't, we will act it out on our children.
Sorry, I was not trying to misquote you at all. I was trying to remember what the phraseology was. Maybe pain inflicted on them by a parent or something like that. And so I was just thinking that in my experience growing up, that it wasn't an either or, that that my mom was both able to be someone that I spoke to about anything, that I could come to for anything, still is. Like I said, she's, I don't remember if I said that on here. I think I did, or if it was before, but I think I talked about how she comes to our house and helps us with homeschooling, with cleaning, with anything we have to do. Maybe it was off camera. But, okay. So, boy, that feels like a long time ago, doesn't it? Woo!
Wait, wasn't this conversation?
That the bond is very deep, and that it is truly, from my perspective and from the perspective of quite a few friends that I have that were spanked, that it was genuinely a non-issue. Now, we're not able to analyze whether we were helped in that moment exactly. So I can't use us as research to refute anything that you're saying. But the claim or the saying that means that we were hurt more, or that there wasn't able to be kind of a usefulness to it in that moment for us. I don't know if I can say that or not. Just speaking from a personal experience, it just was not something that made a huge impression on me. I'm sure coming from a doctorate and PhD, you could probably sit me in a chair and try to parse out like, oh, Abbie, tell me why that's not a problem. But the fact of the matter is I do have that close relationship, and I do not feel the resentment and the bitterness. And so I think that maybe is a source of encouragement for people going forward, that even if research says you should be in disrepair with your parents, that it's often not the case. It can often be the case. I understand that, but that it doesn't have to be.
I don't think it's, I think your coffee cup story is so beautiful because we always have the power to heal whatever, like we're carrying that stuff with us. And when somebody bumps into us, if you're Mother Teresa, that coffee cup is just sweetness and light. We can all choose what to bring with us, what the conclusion is. Well, and your conclusion is your mother loved you and shows up for you. And I applaud that. And I think we wouldn't invalidate if someone were sitting here saying her mother had spanked her and she was in pain about it, we wouldn't be invalidating that.
Right.
But always the conclusion we want going forward is, I think probably even in her case, her mother did what she thought she was supposed to do or needed to do in that moment. I'm not saying that mother was a terrible person. I'm saying we need to we need to acknowledge our pain in order not to visit it on future generations. And in fact, my definition of violence is when we don't acknowledge pain, when we don't know how to deal with pain and let it and work through it, then we do visit it on other people. And I think you have worked through your pain. That's why you have a great relationship with your mother. I think that's not true for most people.
Yeah, and I guess the only pushback I would give is that in the case of discipline, punishments, corrections, which I will acknowledge I didn't receive a ton of because I was kind of I liked my boundaries. I liked to know what I was supposed to be doing. My brother was completely different, but we both have very good relationships with our parents. Even though he's 4 years older and his upbringing was different than mine, and his level of consequences or number of consequences he received was higher because he was more of a boundary pusher. But the only pushback would be that the pain that I've experienced with my parents has come from other things because they're not perfect, but it didn't come from spanking for me.
I have two little pushbacks on things that I'm thinking people might be thinking on both sides. For you, I hear often, well, it's the way you spank. You know, that if you're calm about it and it's a deliberate, they know what it is, versus in anger. They say, oh, well, there's a difference. And for you is that I think about how we're impressionable when we're little. Yeah. And so we think this is the way it is. And so especially if it is maybe delivered in a more calm way, they see their parents being calm, that potentially we have that, like we accept what is our reality type of thing. And I wonder if that has anything to do with why some people maybe experience it more emotionally, maybe traumatizing versus somebody doesn't, especially because if they have a foundation of a good relationship overall. And you know how like sometimes when you grow up you think, oh wow, my parents told me this thing and I just accepted it, and now I'm like, I definitely don't think that, but as a kid I didn't even question it. So I wonder if that has anything to do with the spanking argument.
I think there probably could be something to the fact that it was just kind of a reality that did not seem shocking to me. And so I didn't respond with shock. I think that probably has something to do with it.
Yeah. And thoughts on what I said to you about what I think people might be thinking?
I think when someone hurts you, they hurt you. And if they're hurting you and they have an angry expression, that could be pretty scary. And if they hurt you and they have a calm expression, honestly, that could be scarier. I mean, I think it really depends, right, on that situation. But it could be a little scary to have somebody, especially somebody who is the person you look up to, who protects you, and they have a calm expression, but they're hurting you. Especially if they later say something like, I did that because I love you. I think that's pretty confusing for a kid.
Mm-hmm. So, final question. Why do you think parenting philosophies are such a contentious and emotional topic? We've talked so much about so many beautiful parts of parenting. I think you guys agree on a lot, I think, from what I've said, and if there's, or what I've heard, and you can share whether you think that's the case or not. But yeah, why do you think it's such an emotional topic?
I think because it's easy to make it your identity. Nobody likes to have their identity attacked. Also, we want desperately for our children to do well. We may have differing definitions of what that means ultimately when they're adults, but we want them to, quote, turn out well. We want them to be joy-filled. We want them to have purpose in their life. We want them to know, in my case, I want them to know that they were created by a good God who, they're here on purpose. They are not the result of chance. And so when we are making what we believe to be our best efforts to instill all of that in them, and someone comes along and questions those efforts, it can feel like a very personal attack. And again, quite a bit of this that I've ever interacted with is online, and we have that
I feel like it's such a poor space of understanding reality.
But it is also where a lot of this information is being propagated. So it unfortunately becomes something you really have to interact with because it's where people are going for their parenting advice these days. Yeah, it is. And so the best I can tell, even if you're interacting kindly, even if you are acknowledging the desire and the intention to do good, if you ask questions a lot of times, depending on how founded the person is in their beliefs, or depending on whether they're regurgitating or parroting something they've heard somewhere else and think they should believe but don't really understand how to articulate, then it feels very, very much like an attack and like they're being persecuted. And most people don't respond well to feeling persecuted. So yeah, it can be really strong.
And you?
Where could the stakes be higher, right?
Yeah.
The stakes are so high. It's a sacred responsibility. We're entrusted with these babies, and then the proof is in the pudding 18 years later or whatever. You don't really know whether what you're doing with your 2-year-old, was it okay to let them cry it out, or was it not okay? It's like, you don't know at that moment. And there's so many other factors. You'll never know, actually, whatever you said to your 3-year-old, whatever you did with your 5-year-old, and so I think parents humans don't like to feel uncertain. The stakes are so high, we want to feel like we're doing it right. We're doing a good job. They're going to be fine. And we're desperate to have reinforcement of that. So I think it gets contentious because we want to be right about this thing that matters so much.
Yeah, definitely.
Do you have any final words before we finish?
I just think about the parents that are listening, and I think they are hearing some similar principles. You are the authority in your home. God gave you this child on purpose at this time in history, and you don't have to fear. I mean, we have a lot of uncertainty in our world, and I think that can be really anxiety-inducing for a lot of parents. But my encouragement would be that you are the right person for this job because you already are in the job. Like, fight that urge to abdicate. Lean in really hard, study your children well, and never ever listen to someone else that is telling you couldn't possibly be the best expert of your children. Absolutely listen to wisdom. In my case, I would be saying seek out biblical wisdom, seek out biblical mentors that are able to disciple you and pour into you. They've gone before you and they can give you that specific prescriptive advice because they had a child just like yours, and they're able to say, hey, this worked for us. You can try it. And you can do some trial and error there, but not in the big stake stuff. The trial and error comes in those little tweaks that we do to see if we can make life run a little more smoothly. The rest of it comes in knowing, and I would say, whose you are. Because my identity is not first in my parenting or my marriage or anything. It's in Christ. It's in being His. And so know who you are. Know that you were given this job on purpose, and stay in for the long haul. My favorite parenting verse, that's not a parenting verse, but works perfectly for it, is Galatians 6:9. It says, don't grow weary of doing good, for in the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up.
Love that. Okay, what about you? Any final words?
I think parenting is like the hardest thing we could possibly do. And so somebody listening to this could easily be thinking, yes, but I can't do that. I can't be that person who makes the calm, reasoned decision to, do this or that. And I would just say, the research is pretty clear. I keep quoting the research, that it isn't what you do, it's who you are, which is very much what you just said. Be clear about who you are. Who you are and how you show up with your kids is what matters more than this or that decision that you make. And the don't give up part, it's okay to make mistakes. You're going to make them every day. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. If you're making those 2 steps in the right direction, you're going to end up in a whole new landscape. So I would say everybody listening to this, you don't have to be perfect. You can just keep working on yourself, and that will make all the difference in the world.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for being here. You can hear the noise. Maybe we're in New York now. I really appreciate you guys so much for coming on. I appreciate you sharing your perspectives. So many beautiful things that I heard from you both. So thank you. And we're going to end it here.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.